Good to go. Thank you for joining us. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulties. We're now here. It's 1:03, and I'm going to call to order the City of Desert Hot Springs special meeting of the City Council for May 26, 2020 at 1 p.m. via conference, video conference. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Betts.
Present.
Councilmember Gardner.
Present.
Councilmember Pye.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Griffith.
Present.
And Mayor Mattis.
Present. Let's see, Ms. Pye, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Okay. Please repeat the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
And justice.
for all.
Thank you very much. We'll go to our public hearing, which is the only item on the agenda of the special meeting today. And that's item number 1, which is environmental findings for the general plan amendment, GPA-20-1, and the zoning amendment, ZA-20-1. I'm going to first give it to Rebecca Deming. She'll give a staff report, and we'll go from there. How the public hearing is going to work is a basic public hearing. We'll have entertain questions of the council. Council, if you want to wait until after we open the public hearing and hear public comments, you're more welcome to do that, or you can ask questions before that. Obviously, we can't take any suggestions for approval of the resolution until after the public hearing is closed, so please remember that. We do have quite a few comments today, so we'll be taking those comments after you make your questions known for the council, and then we'll open up the public hearing for questions or comments. The public hearing during comments, if you're out there and you're going to make comments during the public hearing, there is no time limit to your comments, but we do ask that you try to stay within the 3-minute rule. If you need to finish something up, but if you're just going to continue to drag on with the same questions, same comments, I will ask you to wrap it up. But if you can try to stay within 3 minutes, it would help us out. We have close to 20 registered public comments today. So with that said, I'll start with Rebecca Deming.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I have 3 consultants here from MIG, who is our consultant that helped prepare the general plan and EIR. They're here to help present and answer any questions that may come up. We have Laura Stetson, Bob Prossi, and Jose Rodriguez. And I'm going to turn it over to Jose Rodriguez first to give the initial presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Mayor, members of the City Council, I am excited to present to you the general plan, housing element and zoning code update. This is a project that we've been working on over the past 3 to 4 years, and we're excited to get to this point. All right, so on our agenda, so we're going to talk about the scope of actions that are being considered. We'll go through the engagement process, the different public meetings, workshops, and commission meetings and public hearings that we've engaged and went through thus far. We'll talk about the general plan update. We have a new version of the housing element that we will present to you. It is different than the one that was adopted, that this body adopted in September of 2019. We'll talk about the zoning code and the map amendments. And then we'll briefly talk about the environmental impact reports, and then I'll turn it back over to you for questions, comments, and recommendations. So the scope of actions being considered. There's a complete general plan update. As I mentioned, there is a revised housing component, the housing element, the zoning code, a brand new zoning map, and we're also going to look at repealing several older specific plans that either the general plan will cover, or over the past few years, the land uses have changed or it's been purchased by conservation groups, as well as looking at certifying the environmental impact report. So with that, let's start with the public engagement. So 3 years ago, back in May, nearly 3 years ago, over 3 years ago, we had our first community workshop. We had 60 participants, and we talked about a lot of challenges and opportunities in Desert Hot Springs. We did have a land use map workshop later that year. And if you recall, in early 2019, we did bring a draft, an alternative land use plan for you to discuss and create a preferred land use map that the EIR eventually reviewed and looked at. So later that year, we looked at the scoping meeting for the environmental impact report. So we had a public meeting. We then had a housing element workshop specific to the housing element. And then if you recall, we brought the housing element to the Planning Commission for adoption, and then we brought it in front of the City Council for adoption. And I'll talk about why this housing element is different than the one that was adopted late last year. And then finally, earlier this year, we had a public review period for the environmental impact report. When it was released, we did receive some public comments, not only on the environmental impact report, but the general plan. And we'll talk about some of the comments that were received from the public. Again, here's some photos of the first workshop that was well attended. So the general plan update. The general plan area, and I'm briefly going to go over the general plan process, what's in the general plan, and then the area that it covers. So the area that the general plan covers does include the city boundary, as well as what's called the sphere of influence, the county areas that are outside of the city. Now, these areas are not in the jurisdiction of Desert Hot Springs. However, state law does require that the city look to plan for the long-range planning of these areas. In the event the city does annex those areas, there is a land use plan in place. Nevertheless, the city does not have any jurisdiction or can provide any zoning entitlements for those areas, just within the city corporate boundary. In the general plan itself, there is a numerous elements from land use, mobility, economic development. I talked about a new housing element, open space, there's a health and wellness element, safety and noise, and then last, there's an implementation program. So each of these elements includes goals and policies. The implementation program has specific action items that the city will look at to make sure that those goals and policies are implemented. This is your current general plan as it stands today. It includes various land use designations. It does include a separate area for the annexation that was done about 10 years ago, all the way down to the I-10. The new plan that's being proposed creates more of a broader and flexible approach. It combines some of the designations, and it does include a few more new mixed-use designations. However, the detailed in terms of implementing this general plan will be done through the zoning map. So the zoning map will have more land use category or more zoning districts to implement this general plan. Now keep in mind the general plan can only be amended 4 times a year. So the consolidation of districts allows some flexibility, whereas the zoning code can be, the zoning map itself can be updated or amended more than 4 times. The land use designations themselves, again, to create the flexibility, just a handful of designations. There are the 2 mixed use designations, both mixed use neighborhood and mixed use corridors that were added from your current plan of today. Real briefly, I want to talk about some of the key components of each element. So I'll go through kind of this fairly quickly. So the mobility element includes a lot of your transportation components. It includes complete streets. So when that new streets or looking at improvements to existing streets that they don't not only just accommodate vehicles, but they look at pedestrian amenities, bicycle amenities, as well as transit amenities. So it's again a complete streets focus. The economic development element looks at really strengthening some of the established industries in the community, tourism and the cannabis industry. It looks at how can we attract new businesses, retention of existing businesses, and how do we capture local dollars. From the workshops, we heard a lot from the community on the need for more retail and restaurants and entertainment type uses. And so there's goals and policies that address those. The open space and resources element looks at habitat conservation and how do we protect resource conservation from water, mineral, clean energy. And it also looks at aesthetics, and cultural resources in the community. There's a health and wellness element. It looks at access to healthy foods. There's a parks, recreation, and new trails plan that's in this element. And then there's goals and policies that looks at lifelong learning facilities, and that refers to schools and libraries in the community. The safety and noise element focuses on the emergency services, police and fire, as well as how to prepare for various challenges from natural disasters to other types of challenges the city may face in the future. And it also looks at noise issues as well. So what does this mean long-term, and what is the land use plan? What are the implications of the land use plan? So these numbers here reflect the number of new units and future population growth in the general plan. The general plan typically looks at a 20-year horizon into the future. So the 2019 data here on the left is basically last year's number of housing units the city has and approximately how many persons. So we have about just under 30,000 persons. The current general plan, the map that I showed earlier, does show a significant growth from that. So it's looking at nearly 64,000 new units and just under 200,000 persons. Our proposed general plan takes a more moderate growth approach compared to the previous general plan. We did use a lot of mapping to make sure that we were capturing the right growth for the land use areas and making sure that we're incorporating streets within vacant lands as well as new parks. And so that we took a moderate approach, but still, the proposed general plan just in the city alone looks at 34,000 new units. Now this number of units were, in terms of the time frame, the general plan looks at it over the next 20 years, but we cannot determine whether that 34,000 will be built in the next 20 years. It could be the next 30 years, it could be the next 40 years. The market conditions will really determine when those number of units. However, the environmental impact report does look at the 34,000 units in the environmental impact report in the event that those units do get built. And then we do also look at the planning area that does include a larger area. Again, the growth is not as significant as your current general plan just in the city itself. So it's still, in terms of proposed persons, it's still well under 200,000 persons over the next 20 to 40 years. Now, the land use plan has been publicly available, but based on some of the comments we received and staff has received, we are recommending some land use changes, and the Planning Commission has recommended for the City Council to take a look at. One of them is adding a new energy overlay into the land use plan, and that area is identified on the map in the blue areas, and those areas primarily cover the areas where there are the windmills and some solar farms within those areas. And so we try to capture the areas where there are existing facilities. Staff is also recommending expanding the cultivation overlay, and it's only a small area that's right at the intersection of Indian Avenue and the I-10 freeway. So the commercial area, within that area, we are recommending to expand the cultivation area within that area. A couple of minor changes. One was the Riverside County Social Services property that's across the street from the high school. Our previous land use plan had that entire site as a public facility / institutional land use. The front portion of it in the current general plan is approved for commercial. So we are making sure that this current general plan reflects that, and we want to make sure that that frontage does remain as a commercial designation. So we're including that in this land use plan. The other change is to ensure that the Walmart site, the proposed Walmart site that had approval entitlements a while back, remains as a specific plan, so that the development standards in the specific plan are carried over and not changed to the commercial designation that we actually had earlier. So we want to make sure we change that back to a specific plan designation. There were some text changes to the specific plan, or to the general plan. Some of them were clarifying some concepts, other than were reflecting some comments received on the EIR itself. And so not only did they provide comments on the EIR, but they reflected some changes that were suggested during that public review period. One here was clarifying specifically how long specific plans should be reviewed after they've been adopted or changed in the city. Again, there is text that recommends, that goes along or aligns with the energy overlay that's being recommended. So there's a whole set of texts associated with that. I'm not going to read these in detail. They are in the errata that was provided in the documents. One thing in the EIR that was addressed specifically was comments from the water agencies. So we included and revised texts to make sure we were in line with what the water agencies wanted the city to include. Specifically, they wanted to make sure that the city recognized, and through the general plan, that there are going to be some water constraints over the long term that could impact overall development capacity in the city. So we make sure we include language that was reviewed by the water agencies to make sure that we take into account that there may be some constraints in the future. We also looked at addressing and reflecting some of those policies to reflect that. So you can see we talked about different policies to ensure that there's coordination. I think that was the key thing that came out of this, is that there's more coordination between the city and the water agencies, particularly when the water agencies are updating their urban water management plans, and so that there's really good coordination between the city and the water agencies. So that's all reflected in the revised goals and policies, as well as implementation measures to ensure that there's coordination between the agencies. So all that's been reflected in the general plan that's been before you. And so here is the land use plan itself, with some of those changes that I've just talked about that weren't previously in the public review documents that were up earlier. However, Planning Commission, we presented to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission has approved those for your consideration today. And so those are all being brought forth to you. So that brings us to the housing element. So the housing element is a component of the general plan. It is an element, although it follows a different cycle. Typically, housing elements are updated from 4 to 8 years, or required to be updated every 4 to 8 years. Desert Hot Springs is working to complete their 5th cycle. Technically, this was due back in 2014 or 2013. And so the city's still working with HCD. We've been working with HCD over the past several years to make sure our 5th cycle housing element meets all of the current state laws, and we want this to be certified by HCD in the coming months. So we've been working with them very closely to make sure the programs we've been added have been adequately addressed to meet their needs. And just to keep in mind, schedule-wise, the 6th cycle of the housing element for the SCAG region, which includes Desert Hot Springs, are due in October 2021. So once this housing element is certified and adopted, working on the next housing element will probably commence fairly soon. As I talked about earlier, a previous version of this housing element was adopted in September 2019. How is this housing element different from that one? This housing element specifically addresses the new zoning amendments that we've made, specifically those that are reflecting the residential land uses and the permitting process. So at that time, when we updated the previous housing element, it didn't have that zoning in place. So the language was more nebulous. At this point now, the zoning is in place. The draft zoning, proposed zoning that I'll talk about shortly, is in place. So this new housing element has all of the specific language requirements that HCD is requiring for us in this housing element. And so HCD has requested, and for those, HCD is the Community Housing and Community Development Department from the state of California. Real briefly, I'll talk about the contents of the housing element. There's various components. There's a needs assessment. We look at some housing data and market trends and census data. There's constraints, governmental constraints, market constraints, environmental constraints. There's a resource section. We look at all of the available sites that could accommodate new housing. And then we look at previous accomplishments from the earlier housing elements and what's been completed over the past 10 years or so. This housing element, as well as the 2019 one that was in front of you late last year, still looks at making sure we address or accommodate 7,500 new housing units in the city. Now, these are the housing units that are not required to be built by the city. but that the city has to ensure that it has the general plan and zoning in place to accommodate those 7,500 new housing units. Not only the zoning map, but also the use tables, the residential use tables, the development standards, particularly for mixed use. So all those are now in place. And so that's what this new housing element will incorporate. Here is the map that shows where those 7,500 units will be accommodated, including some of the existing specific plans. The appendix does include a detailed table that includes all of the APN numbers that identify the sites where the housing units can be accommodated, what's the current land use, what's the current zoning, and how many units those sites can accommodate. And when you add it all up, it adds up to the 7,500 units per what's being required by the state. There were some minor changes that we're making to the housing element per HCD requirements up to the last minute prior to the Planning Commission. There's been some minor changes that HCD is requiring us to make. A couple of them were adding some new programs. One was to address SB 35 in terms of streamlining affordable housing information. That is program number 10. A new program number 16, although has been added, specifically requested by HCD to promote furthering fair housing opportunities, particularly those protected by the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. And so that you can see on program number 16, as well as you'll see there's a lot of red line markups, and those red line markups in the errata that was provided to you show all the changes from the September 2019 adopted housing element that this body has previously adopted. With that, let's turn over to the zoning code amendments and what changes are being proposed here. So the zoning amendment is a targeted zoning amendment, meaning we not comprehensively updating the entire zoning code, but we did make a lot of significant changes. Some of these changes include revising the residential use tables and standards completely. So that is a complete rehaul. We did look at also commercial industrial use tables as well. We incorporated or developed new mixed use standards, as well as use tables for the new mixed use districts in the land use plan. And the key thing is that with each of these use tables that identify where the different uses are allowed, each use now has its own specific definition. So the definitions has been extremely expanded. So hundreds of new definitions have been added to reflect all of the all of the new uses in the use tables. So if there is a question on what use is being proposed on a specific site, there is a definition to make sure that that is the use that is being intended, and so that staff can look at it closely and fall within the use tables. There is a new administrative conditional use permit section that allows a little bit of flexibility for the city. It's not an over-the-counter approval. It does require director approval. If it's appealed, it could be appealed to the Planning Commission, but it does allow some flexibility for planning staff to have some approval of some types of lesser type intensive uses. And so if you look at the use tables, you'll see a new administrative conditional use permit section. We also revised the administrative chapter, particularly who's the review authority for specific entitlements and development permits. And then lastly, most importantly, there is a brand new zoning map. So no longer will you have one map that does both the land use general plan map and policy map and a zoning map, but you have a separate zoning map and a separate land use plan map. And so we're excited to bring forth the zoning map. And HCD was really happy that we're including a new zoning map as well. So real briefly, here are the use table, just a snippet of some of the use tables, what they look like, and the development standards. So this is the residential section. And what we've done is make sure that we put in a lot of the new uses that meet state law, but also what makes sense for Desert Hot Springs, as well as the development standards. All have been revised. We've removed any inconsistencies or standards that didn't make sense. Commercial tables, we included a new downtown commercial district. We have a new highway commercial district that looks primarily at uses along State Highway 62 or the I-10 freeway. We also have a new business park district as well. The industrial use table will be a brand new table taken out of the commercial districts table that where it's at now and have a standalone district. And so I think that's important and key. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have new mixed use standards, both a use table and development standards specifically for mixed uses along Palm Drive on certain sites and Pearson. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a brand new review authority table that looks at who are the responsible entities for certain types of permits. So again, this is just a snippet. This table is much longer, and the Planning Commission, City Council do have appeal and review authority as well. New text language for the administrative conditional use permit section. As I mentioned, an expansive, many pages of new definitions. And of course, we have a new zoning map that is consistent with the general plan land use. Again, there are some zoning map corrections that we've made. Again, these are consistent with the changes we've made to the land use plan more recently that weren't necessarily publicly available prior to the Planning Commission. But again, the Riverside Social Services building, we want to make sure we capture that commercial component on the front. And then the expansion of the Colton overlay boundary, again, just over that commercial highway and business park section. For the most part, there's existing specific plans that allow cannabis type uses in this overlay area. So the staff is asking just to extend the boundary all the way out to the freeway in Indian Avenue. And again, here is the draft zoning map that takes into account all those changes that I talked about. There were also some minor zoning text changes to the multifamily housing standards. Again, these are more cleanup items and removing some inconsistencies. And that's typical when a zoning code is updated, that we remove some of the inconsistencies that we may have missed. We want to make sure we captured all of these. There are some changes here, nothing too significant. So the next section I want to talk about is the repealing of specific plans. As I mentioned, some of these specific plans either were not working, really old, or conservation districts or agencies have purchased them for habitat conservation, or some of them have been built out. And Rebecca may talk to you about some of these after this presentation. But here's a map of the specific plans. We're requesting to remove the Vortex specific plan in downtown. We have new downtown mixed use, a downtown commercial designation that'll address that particular area. Let's see, as you can see, there's various specific plans. The Indigo Lake specific plan and the Vista Del Monte specific plan, those two specific plans are primarily being, most of the land has been purchased for conservation, habitat conservation areas. And the Mountain View Estates specific plan, for example, majority of that specific plan has been built out. And we do have new residential zoning districts and new land use plan for any vacant land that's remaining, that some of those designations could apply. Let's move into the environmental impact report. This is kind of nearing the end of my presentation. We're almost there, if we can just hold on. So the environmental impact report that MIG prepared addresses all of the basically analyze the general plan, the zoning map, and all the changes we requested. And a full program environmental impact report was prepared. As I mentioned earlier, this report was available for 45 days for the public to comment on. And as I mentioned, some agencies and public comments were received on the EIR as well as the general plan and zoning map. These were all the topic areas. This is a partial list. I have a second page. So these are all of the areas where an impact analysis was conducted. The areas or the topic areas that are in purple have mitigation measures to either lessen the impacts or that the impacts still remain and they could not be overridden by mitigation. So those include air quality, biological resources, greenhouse gas emissions, hydrology and water quality, noise, our second page here, public services, transportation and traffic, as well as utilities and service systems. So all of those sections had either some sort of mitigation measures to address the impacts. We did receive a handful of public comments, letters that requested to look at both the EIR and the general plan. You can see we received several from water agencies, and those are why some of the changes we made earlier was to address some of these comments from these various agencies. So let me get to the recommendation part and what the City Council will be looking to adopt. So there's a resolution for the City Council to certify the environmental impact report, adopt the findings of fact, the adopting of the statement of overriding considerations on those target areas where we could not lessen the impacts, as well as approving a general plan amendment and the land use map, so the new land use map and changes to the general plan. There's a resolution in repealing the following specific plans: for Desert Highlands Specific Plan, Eagle Point, Indian Hills, Mountain View Estates, and I apologize, there's a typo in there. It's Mountain Views Estates 2, no, Roman letter number 2. On the Royal Vista Rancho del Oro Specific Plan, Vortex, Indigo Lake, and Vista del Monte. And then the last item is the ordinance for the zoning code, amending the following or adding the following chapters for definitions, residential, commercial districts, the new mixed-use districts, changes to the industrial districts, the administration chapter, and adding a new administrative conditional use permit section, as well as the new zoning map. So that concludes my presentation. I do want to turn it over to Rebecca if there's any other additional comments. As she mentioned earlier, myself, Laura Stetson, and Bob Prossi are also here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. I wanted to start with a few, we came up with, based on comments we had received, 2 additional corrections or typos that we need to incorporate. One is the map on I have 3 parcels that were originally designated for public facilities, and those are privately owned. So we're going to recommend at the end of public comments that those be updated in the general plan land use map and zoning map to residential low density designation. And then on land use page 11, LU 11, under residential rural desert, there's a text that says that it is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, but yet the text also says that it is 3 persons per acre, and that's supposed to be 3 persons per 5 acre because it's just trying to repeat how many houses. So obviously it's not 3 people per acre when there's only 1 house per 5. So it's just an additional recommended, staff recommended updates on those. And I'll be happy to turn it over to any questions that the council has. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, MIG. You guys did a fantastic job, Jose. You've been there since day 1, so thank you for all the work. I know it's been a lot. Hopefully we can get through this today and move forward. We'll see what happens here. Before I open it up to public hearing, I'll take questions from the council. I'm just going to go across my board here, and I'll start with Gary. Councilmember Gardner.
No, I'll wait till after public comments, but I will echo your comments, Mr. Mayor, of how comprehensive and how well produced this document was, how much staff time and how much public input was involved. It's all very well reflected, and just kudos to our staff and our consultant for doing such a great job on it.
Councilmember Pai. I didn't hear you, but I'm assuming there was no questions. I saw your mic go on and off. Councilmember Betts?
Yeah, thanks. When will we get to some of the specific questions regarding some of the designations? We've had some comments that have been received regarding, well, particular some areas that were designated as public, institutional, which are actually somebody's property that they own.
You're more welcome to ask those questions now if you'd like.
Okay, then you're familiar with the comments that came in from Mr. Madan. I saw those in the public comment letters that were distributed to council. And he was, on one in particular, he was questioning up there by Painted Hills and Buena Vista schools. There's some property along Alisco Drive that I believe is not in the ownership of Palm Springs Unified School District. And it's showing on the map as public institutional. And it probably should be zoned residential in keeping with the, so anyhow, what happened with that one? What are we doing with that?
So those are the same 3 parcels that I just mentioned that we will, at the end of all of the comments, when we make our formal recommendation for approval, that those 3 parcels that were mistakenly identified as a public facility to be changed to RL, the residential low density.
Which is, okay, that would be the same as the surrounding communities then.
That's correct.
Okay, so the, are we taking, Mr. Mayor, are we taking very specific notes on any of these changes so that when there is a motion crafted that it can specifically and is read into the record, be reflected rather than just caught in general conversation and not recapped? And be
I would hope that our staff would take notes and make those comments during their recommendation at the end, yes.
Okay, and I just like it somehow a formal, I mean, this is pretty serious stuff here. The sphere of influence, are we covering that in this section right now?
So the general plan land use map and general plan does incorporate all lands, including the sphere of influence.
Okay, so we've got some areas that are very unique to energy, renewable energy generation, particularly wind. You know, wind doesn't happen like it does everywhere. Same as with our hot water zone. There's only certain places where that hot water is available. And so the question would be, if we carved out an area where that reflects that renewable energy area, but doesn't incorporate all of the industrial areas for renewable energy, how did we handle that specifically?
So we did add the energy overlay zone, as was discussed in the presentation, and is in the blue dotted line on the land use map with the description. It doesn't prohibit other types of industrial uses, and it very clearly states that it can also take other industrial uses. But we took a look when we created that overlay. We looked at where all of the existing wind energy is located, along with where the county had the wind energy area in their general plan. So we believe we incorporated, it does have a lot of areas, but there are already a lot of areas out there with wind energy.
Okay, so, you know,
I minimize but cover everything.
Okay, and I understand some of this has been covered in the presentation, but I want to double check it and make sure it's clear and that we've covered it. So there are areas of industrial land that do not include the ability to put solar on the ground, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but there are other areas where it's specifically allowed or other uses are allowed.
Correct.
Okay, good, got that cleared up. We show residential, looks like rural desert residential in a intersection of Pearson Boulevard and Little Morongo. Yet everywhere else surrounding that is residential low, and this one's showing residential rural is what it's showing in that intersection. And everywhere else around it is residential low. And I'm just curious as to why the heck that wouldn't cover commercial.
So the residential, you're saying it's residential low or it's residential rural?
Okay, according to my map and watching these colors, it says residential rural, one
Okay.
dwelling unit per 5 acres,
So
right at a main intersection of Little Morongo and Pearson, high traffic area.
So the reason that we have a lot of the areas there as residential rural, because they're conservation areas with the MSHCP.
So are they allowing it to be residential rural?
So that was the direction that council took at our meeting, where we had a letter from CVAG where there were concerns where we weren't in the MSHCP conservation areas. And so the motion by council was to direct staff for all MSHCP conservation areas to be designated in our general plan as residential rural desert. And
Okay.
so that's what we move forward with.
Got it. All right, so everybody's wondering what happened with MSHCP taking out a prime commercial area. There it was. Indian and Pearson, mixed use neighborhood. I presume that would include commercial.
That's correct.
And all right, I might have something else, Mr. Mayor, but that hits the, oh, one more up there by Augusta. By Augusta, is that conservation area at the top of Augusta? Same comment, same person, Mr. Madan commented.
So those areas are not towards the north in the sphere of influence that he requested that are currently RD. His two requests to go to RL, those are high slope areas and high fire zones. That was the reason that MIG, when working with them, we originally designated that as RD. Those are not conservation areas, but they are high fire and high slope areas. So
high slope would be and another terminology could be great view lots, right?
could be.
Yeah. So, but we're limiting that to just 1 per 5 acres?
Well, you can still cluster. So you could preserve the view and the open space on those large lots and cluster the development so that the overall density is still 1 unit per 5 acres, but that doesn't mean that it means that it could still have a little bit less if you're leaving open space.
Okay, so what we're saying is in that particular area, we're not looking at the typical, subdivision that we've been talking about. This would be homes that are somehow plopped in a rural residential zoning. Did you determine if he owns that property? Was that why his concern on that?
I believe it does show an investment group that owns it, and I believe he has interest or owns that investment group.
Okay.
And some of these, especially in those areas, those are that kind of rural desert area up there with the high slope is kind of a perfect example where we could look at a specific plan when they move forward, or even look at a density change if they do have a good process or a good plan that we want to consider at the time of development. So we're not necessarily opposed to a general plan or zone update when we've got a good project. We just have to look at it as a blank slate right now and trying to make sure that we're covering that.
Okay, and my final comment here is we're going to be looking at specific plans, basically the ones that are outdated, and I am speaking to all of them generally, not any specifically, because I think there's a few here where I don't know what the city attorney is going to determine, but I think somebody's going to have conflicts in some of these. For example, myself and Rancho Del Oro for sure. But I just want to generally if you could recap for me again, what is it exactly that we're doing with these things we're calling outdated? What's going to be the effect? What happens here?
So basically what happens is there'll be no separate document to drive the development. It will follow the zoning code just like any other RL zone. So for instance, a good example is the Eagle Point specific plan. We recently brought to Planning Commission and Council an Eagle Point, or it might have only gone to Planning Commission so far, sorry, confusing two of them. But it doesn't even have the requirements. It already refers to the current zoning map. And so it doesn't make sense to have a specific plan that doesn't really have any direction within the specific plan. Some of them are built or partially built, or what are built and they don't even meet the specific plan. So previous mapping doesn't follow the current specific plan. So we're just recommending to kind of get rid of it. That's the example of the Indian Hills specific plan. That's only partially built, but looking at the layouts and the street design on the specific plan that I have that shows approved by council does not match how it was the map that was approved by council after. So there's some conflict there. So we're recommending getting rid of it. Some of them are just, like was said by Jose, they're been dedicated to open space, like Indigo Lakes specific plan has all been dedicated open space. So there's no reason to have that specific plan. We've also the Vista Del Monte only has a commercial corner, so we're recommending that you just get rid of the specific plan and that the commercial corner just follow our zoning code. So the effect is they basically will just have to follow the zoning code when they are ready to develop if they're not developed. The Mountain View Estates 2 is not developed, but it does have all of the lots already recorded, so they're already set and just can be built as a house, matching our standard process through a development permit and just not go off the actual specific plan. It will go off, city standards. So that's the real effect, is that they'll just follow city standards instead of a separate guideline, a separate document.
Okay, and so unless something radically changes from what was originally approved for, say, like, let's just use Eagle Point. There's empty lots in there. Somebody wants to come in and build those. And as long as they follow basically what was approved by the Planning Commission at the time, they don't need to come back to the Planning Commission. However, if they're planning to do something like 3-story apartments or, radically change the architecture of the homes, they've got to come back to the Planning Commission, correct?
Either way, because they are required to still fill out a development permit because they're part of a subdivision, they go to Planning Commission whether there's a radical change or not. If the development permit has expired, they'll need a new development permit to Planning Commission. It doesn't matter whether they're in a specific plan or not. So Planning Commission gets a look at it. The difference is if the Planning Commission is trying to review the specific plan or just review the findings we have in our zoning code that say that it needs to fit the neighborhood.
Okay, I've gotten a lot of questions on these, and so there's people listening, and I wanted to make sure that they hear the answer from you instead of me, and so I appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, that's all I have right now. I'll probably have something later, but
Yeah, we'll get back to more if you have more questions after the public hearing.
thank you.
Just so people understand, I know a lot of it's hard to follow on via conference, but as Mr. Bev was alluding to, we had a lot of comments emailed to us, the city council, and to our staff over the last few days, let alone over the last year on this process. So he's referring to some of the comments that were made today via email. If you look at his background, you'll see the map that he's also referring to. It's hard, we can't obviously put it up on the screen at the same time, so I know it's a little difficult. I hope all your patience so we get through this. Mr. Griffith, do you have any questions before we open the public hearing?
I do. I want to thank Councilmember Betts for asking a lot of those questions, because I think we all did. We all got the emails and we're curious. I just have a couple. And so one is that we're talking about amending the zoning map to be the one that we had, that Mr. Betts has behind him, correct? That's the one we all have?
Mr. Betts, Councilmember Betts has the general plan map. The
Okay.
zoning map is more detailed and does not include areas in the sphere of influence.
Okay. And so is that set, or are we still working on that?
There are some adjustments that can be made by council. The biggest constraint to doing that is our EIR. So for instance, the requests we got in to change the zoning, which would also affect, sometimes the request would change both the general plan and the zoning. Sometimes your request could just affect the zoning. For instance, if you wanted to change the type of commercial designation, like you wanted to go from commercial business park to commercial highway service or vice versa, that would not trigger a change in the general plan, but would trigger a change on the zoning map. But the requests, for instance, the emails that we received earlier to go from, say, residential low to mixed use or residential rural to residential low would change both maps and could have an effect on the EIR, where we wouldn't recommend any kind of increase in intensity because we need to make sure that our EIR still matches our land use. Otherwise, it could throw us into needing to do something like a supplemental EIR, and that would take a lot of time, and we're under time restrictions with the state.
Okay, so the reason I'm bringing this up is you and I have had conversations before about this, and I want to get that out there. On the zoning map, I noticed that from Buena Vista on Palm Drive, both sides of Palm Drive, from Buena Vista down to Two Bunch Palms is currently designated a small slice of that as commercial general. And then south of Two Bunch, we are looking at mixed use corridor. Now, my question to you, and I want to put this out there, and I do have some information that I think will make it a little more understandable what I'm looking at, is if there's a way to make that section on Palm Drive from Buena Vista down to Two Bunch Palms as mixed use corridor. Now, mixed use corridor does allow a higher density of housing. And so I got a ton of notes here, so I just bear with me, please. So the California Strategic Growth Council has the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program, AHSC. And every year they make available grants to cities to help offset the development costs for certain specific reasons. And there are some restrictions on that. One of the things I would like to do, and we weren't ready last year, we're not going to be ready this year, but possibly in whatever next year is, 2021, I don't even know my days anymore, is if we could look at doing some grants for some projects. They have to be shovel ready, so we have to prepare. But just so you know, these grants, they start at, where's all my notes? It's on this page. So the minimum request is $1 million up to $30 million. And it can offset development fees. It can offset the cost of construction costs, things like that. But if we were able to change that designation there to mixed use corridor, it would allow us to meet the minimum density requirements, which under mixed use corridor is a max of 20. And in AHSC, it's a minimum of 20 dwelling units per acre. Now, I know that residential, high density residential is higher, but that may not be within the restrictions. For instance, some of these developments have to be within a half mile of transit. So some of our higher density things may not make that requirement. It's a pretty competitive process. And so what we want to do, if we're going to be realistic at those kind of things, is meet as many of the requirements as possible. So if we were able to change that zoning designation to mixed use corridor and possibly move that general down towards where the mixed use corridor is, which is say south of Aqua Soleil, down in that area, that might actually enable us to qualify for some of these programs. If you want an idea of what that might look like, not exactly, but on page 24 of the draft plan is an example. If you do mixed use, you can have retail on the first floor and then dwelling units above. And it's a really nice way from a developer standpoint to maximize the return on the costs that they're going to have. You know, if it's just commercial general, you might have a big box, which big boxes are going out of the way. I doubt anyone's going to put the money in for a standalone restaurant. But if you have this housing element on top of it, not the housing element we're talking about, but if you have housing on top of this retail, then you can have economies of scale that might make it a little more desirable for developers to come in and develop it. And in conjunction with possible grants, lower the costs. In addition, it makes it a little more walkable. It makes that section a little more walkable, which I think is real palatable to a lot of people. And I think my opinion, I think it would be a good idea if we could actually swap those designations so there's no impact on having to do like an EIR or DIR.
So as you said, we discussed this a little bit ahead of time, and we did run this through our consultants spoke with MIG, our consultant, on this change. And actually, we kind of learned that commercial is one of the highest impacts. So you don't, my understanding, and Jose, perhaps you step in, is that we don't actually even need to switch. That kind of change would be in a sense a reduced impact than all commercial to have a commercial or a mixed use, and that change is able to be done in the general plan and zoning without affecting the EIR.
Okay, so is that something we would have to like do an amendment today to do that?
Yeah, so we would include that as part of the motion.
Okay, so that's something that I would desire. And just so you know, we talked about, I wrote down here the RHNA, the RHNA needs, and how we're looking at for that less than 50%. I think the number was 900 and some. And that is actually one of the things that actually could help us qualify even more. The average affordability restricted units of 50% AMI. And so that could really, really boost us and maybe help us with our RHNA numbers in the future. So that's something that I personally would like to see. I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but I think it would be a positive thing to do.
And if I can clarify, you were wanting from Buena Vista to Hacienda, correct?
Yeah, that whole section where it's commercial general, I would like, if
Perfect.
possible. And that's really all I have for now.
Okay. So gone through all the council members. We're going to get to our public hearing. I know that we have multiple documents, Gerald, you can talk about that were delivered via email, letters, those things. And then you're going to outline the first three speakers. Again, each speaker, we don't have, since we're not in a public forum, we don't have it set up in favor, in neutral, and opposition. So we're just going to let you do it. If you do want to mention whether you're in favor or opposition of the general plan or just making neutral comments, we would appreciate that, but you don't have to. Gerald, did you need to make any announcements about what you received?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So just for the record, I'd like to note that the city received written comments from Chris Lucker with Wintech, Mike Lang, SK Madan with Palm Investment Group, and Inland Counties Legal Services. So those were distributed to the council prior to this hearing and is available upon request.
And then our first three speakers.
Yes, okay, so as the mayor mentioned, we did receive 22 individuals registering to speak under the public comment period. I will name them in groups of 3. If for any reason any of these individuals are having technical difficulties where they're not able to speak right away, then we can circle back after the last speaker. So the first 3 I'm going to name is Susan Boyer, followed by John Barry, followed by Michael Tenen. So Susan Boyer.
Susan, again, everybody will have, you have a limited, not limited time, you have the time that you need to make your comments. We ask that you try to keep that under 3 minutes if you can. At the 3-minute mark, we'll try to get you to wrap up if you can. We do, again, have 22 speakers. Susan, it's all yours.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I don't see Susan Boyer in as an attendee, so we can jump ahead to John Barry.
John Barry, you're next.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and council members. First of all, I don't have any questions. I just have some general comments. My first comment is that we would be in favor of the current general plan and the zoning maps and amendments that have been presented to both previously to the Planning Commission and now to the City Council. But more importantly, my comments are just that we as a prospective new business people in the city have been very grateful for the opportunity to introduce ourselves to the city and to the council members individually. And thus far, we have truly enjoyed the opportunities that we've had of speaking with and working together with city staff and everything. We've just found that the attitude and the mindset with the city is very cooperative and very business oriented, and we've truly enjoyed that. More specifically, I think your staff needs to be highly commended for what I know was a lot of long and tedious hard work with regards to putting together this general plan and the zoning maps. From our perspective, is very forward thinking. It allows for a lot of flexibility for the city, and it incorporates many, many things that you guys are not only faced with currently, but will be faced with in the future. So we personally would like to commend the staff for their work and their forward-thinking abilities. In particular, I think Rebecca Deming and Patricia Villalobos and her staff and Doria Wilms have been very, very positive to work with together so far. And we, as a prospective new business in the city, look forward to being an active and vital part of the community and in working together with the city in the future and everything. And that's all the comments that I have at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Who's our next speaker?
Next speaker is Michael Tennant.
Michael, are you there? Michael? Tennant, I see you on the screen, but we're not hearing your audio. All right, we'll come back to Mr. Tennant. What's our next three speakers?
Next three speakers is Susan Miller, Paula Smith, and Robin Dufault.
And we'll go with Susan Miller first. Susan, can you unmute yourself?
Mr. Mayor, are there specific instructions for unmuting if they're calling in by phone?
Yes.
Can we repeat those to them? They may not know how to do the unmuting.
And I'm sorry, my microphone went dead for a minute. I was just asking Gerald that same question.
Okay.
Gerald?
Yes, if you're calling in by phone, *6 will toggle mute and unmute. *9, you can raise or lower your hand to get my attention.
Susan Miller, are you there? All right, we'll come back to you, Ms. Miller. Paula Smith.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I don't have any questions at this time. My comments are excellent job on the entire staff for all of the hard work they've done. And as my business partner, John Berry, said earlier, it has been a pleasure working with the entire staff. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We're going to go to Robin Default. Is she next? Robin, are you there?
I'm here.
Perfect. We can hear you.
Thank you so much. I really don't have any comments particularly. I just wanted to thank the city, mayor, council, especially Rebecca. She's been very forthright and responsive whenever I've called the city. And thank you very much for all your work.
Thank you very much for your comments, Robin. Our next three speakers.
Anthony Kim, followed by Patrick Halperin, followed by Michael Lang.
Anthony, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good afternoon. These comments, both public and written, are on behalf of Inland County's Legal Services and the Public Interest Law Project. As you probably know, we brought litigation related to the housing elements in 2018 and obtained a judgment through a settlement agreement. And we appreciate the city is moving towards adopting changes to the general plan and the zoning amendments that will bring the city closer to compliance with the judgment that we obtained and the requirements of California housing law. While we generally support adoption of the changes that are proposed, we have identified certain deficiencies and inconsistencies, which we outlined in a letter to the Planning Commission on May 11th, which was included in the documents that we sent in. We're recommending the following necessary policy changes, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss these changes with city staff and or council members. The first change is that the city needs to complete necessary rezoning of sites to accommodate both the 5th cycle and 4th cycle carryover regional housing needs assessment, RHNA. Further, these rezoned sites must allow owner-occupied and rental multifamily residential uses by right for developments with 20% or more units affordable to lower-income households, and must have minimum densities of 20 dwelling units per acre. As of right now, the proposed zoning amendments do neither of these things. Second, the proposed zoning ordinance satisfies some, but not all requirements of the settlement agreement that we have with the city. First of all, residential care facilities, the language in the zoning ordinance is confusing and inconsistent. For example, the definition for a group home for 6 residents or fewer is ambiguous. Residential care facilities for 6 or fewer residents are not explicitly allowed in residential zones, and there's no indication where residential care for facilities for residents of 7 or more are allowed at all. We are urging for amendments to the zoning ordinance to clear up both of these issues. Also, there's no definition of senior congregate care housing, and the zoning amendment does not remove or amend the current zoning ordinance development standards for senior citizen congregate care housing, nor does it list senior housing as an allowed use in residential areas. We urge that senior housing not be excluded from any zone where other residential uses are allowed, and that it's not subject to more onerous conditions based solely on the age of the residents. Furthermore, the zoning amendments restrict siting of housing where 2+ persons on parole or probation reside. This raises fair housing concerns because people of color are disproportionately more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system and therefore more likely to be on parole or probation. We urge the elimination of this restriction. Finally, paragraph 1F of the settlement agreement, which was also provided to the council, involves public participation. As of right now, the city has not complied with all of the public participation requirements in that paragraph. Therefore, adoption of the 4-year update will not satisfy paragraph 1F of the settlement agreement. So in conclusion, we would like the city to consider and make the policy changes that I've outlined and that are provided in the written comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker, Drew.
Next speaker is Patrick Halperin.
Patrick, are you there?
I don't see him in here, Mr. Mayor, so we can
Next.
jump ahead to Michael Lang.
Michael Lane, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Michael. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you for letting me speak. I have submitted my point of view regarding 59 acres that I own at 20th and Little Morongo. I talked last time briefly. And basically, the essence of the issue that I have concerning the rezoning of my property is that for the past 18 years that I've owned it, it's been zoned as light industrial. And now you guys want to make it a park or something. I don't understand why 59 acres is going to be made useless. And basically, I feel it's the City Council's efforts to invoke eminent domain in taking over my property and not giving me the benefit of developing it in the way that I had always intended to develop it. So please explain to me, if you will, what your collective position is with respect to this rezoning of 59 acres that's located, right along the 10 freeway, right alongside all of the other cannabis facilities. And I might add that Mr. Rodriguez earlier mentioned that, in fact, you guys are wanting to now expand the cannabis zone over towards Indian. And so what is this? Is this an abusive process? Are you giving gifts to one and taking away from another? I'm pretty appalled with what's happening. And I think earlier today, Councilman Betts responded to my emails and took an interest in looking at where the property is located. And I mentioned to him my concerns. I also have sent numerous emails to Rebecca Deming over the past 6 months or so, indicating why I feel that this change in zoning is overzealous, I believe. So I don't want to go around and around with this. Maybe I need to speak to Mr. Kim, the previous speaker, and see what he can do as far as bringing some type of legal cause of action against the city in connection with this. I'm frustrated at this point, and I suppose you can hear the frustration in my voice. I apologize for that, but I think it's the community development and the future growth of the community that is at stake here. And to encourage growth and business development should be the design of the city council. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Michael, for your comments. At this time, we'll move to the next comment, which is Gerald.
Next three is Paul DePilatis, Martin Bunning, and then Nathan Bouvet.
Is Paul on the line, Paul? Paul, are you there?
Scott, I am, but I didn't have any comments. I just was listening in.
All right, thank you, Paul. Our next speaker is Martin Bunning. Martin? Do you see him there?
Yeah, he's not here, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Nathan Dubé? Nathan, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Got a few comments in regards to the general plan update. Again, for the record, my name is Nathan Bouvet of MPB Development. I'm the authorized representative of Don Clausen of Dillon Road LLC. The subject site that we're wanting the City Council to take into consideration is located at the southwest corner of Palm Drive and Dillon Road. The address itself is 66135 Dillon Road. To give you a better idea of where it's located, it's about 6 parcels southwest of the Palm-Dillon Road intersection. This isn't to be confused with another project I represented about a year or so ago on the southeast corner of Palm and Dillon Road. They were also looking for RV storage to be developed on that southeast corner there. This development, similar to what has been proposed in the past, is an RV storage facility on an existing 4.68 acre site. It includes approximately 194 covered and uncovered RV parking stalls, anywhere from 12 foot by 20 feet, 12 feet by 40 feet, and 12 feet by 50 feet. Included when this is to move forward, if we're allowed to move forward as an RV storage facility, would also include 7 parking stalls designated for customer parking, 1,492 square foot caretaker residence, gated access with 24-hour on-site security, decorative perimeter walls, including slump stone and wrought iron, and approximately 30,000 square feet of enhanced interior and exterior desert-friendly landscaping. As you all know, the existing zoning designation prior to the update is rural residential. The general plan designation is also rural residential. Currently, as it stands, RV storage is a conditionally permitted use in the light industrial district, subject to a conditional use permit. The general plan update, as indicated previously, is proposed to be mixed-use corridor, including mixed-use corridor designations to the immediate east, extending all the way to Palm Drive. In this case, the mixed-use designation would not permit an RV storage facility without processing a general plan amendment designating the site as light industrial. Wanting to avoid previous concerns by both the Planning Commission and City Council, where if this was to be allowed in an industrial designation, at that time, it would by default allow cannabis-oriented uses to be developed. To address this concern and to afford the property owner the ability to develop the site as an RV storage facility, The property owner would request that the City Council allow RV storage in the mixed-use corridor subject to a conditional use permit or similar entitlement, possibly a development agreement, to further minimize the type of use that could be at that location. Again, currently the proposed mixed-use corridor designation does not allow RV storage or similar uses. However, allowing RV storage in the mixed-use corridor in this area would help maintain consistency with similar uses. A perfect example is immediately adjacent to the site is a U-Haul facility, which the property owner also manages. That concludes my comments. I would request and hope that you take this into consideration prior to moving forward with the general plan update that allows for RV storage at that site. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Nathan. Our next speaker.
Next, group of three is Tron Fraser, Fred Noble, and S. Madan. I don't see Mr. Fraser, so we'll go to Fred Noble.
Mr. Noble, are you there?
Yes, I am. My comments will be brief, which I guess is good news. Compliment the staff on a job well done. This is about the third or fourth general plan that we've participated in as landowners. And I think this one has gone more quickly and professionally than any of the other ones. Our interest is, of course, in your area of your sphere of influence at the south end of the city limits over by the Edison Devers substation. In the area within your sphere exists about $2 billion worth of energy infrastructure that is combining wind, solar, and the cleanest form of peaking power plants. We appreciate the staff understanding that and incorporating the energy overlay into the mapping. This enables the county, as it permits these areas, to look to your general plan and not find conflicts with their views. And if one day this is added to the city of Desert Hot Springs, the existing uses are comforted that they can continue to operate. My second comment is on your generally about the zoning ordinance. When you list the uses that can be done in industrial, you inevitably do not list the latest and best technology because you haven't heard about it yet. For example, there is now technology coming from Switzerland that enables projects to take greenhouse gases out of the air and sequester CO2. That's not one of the uses that you've listed, of course, nor has Palm Springs. But Palm Springs does have a provision in its zoning ordinance which you might want to consider. And it's a catch-all at the end of the industrial ordinance and the commercial ordinance that says, and any other use that the Planning Commission believes is consistent with the general plan. For example, in Palm Springs, the ordinance allows you to tan leather, but not produce microchips. Most everything that's been developed in the city limits of Palm Springs for renewables has occurred under that catch-all provision. I commend it to you because you cannot list every use that you may want to later permit. And if the Planning Commission is in a position to approve conditional use permits that are consistent with the general plan but not listed specifically, you will do much to get the latest technology developed in your city. That is the extent of my comment. Again, a job well done, and we appreciate the attitude of the staff and the government, listening carefully to what we had to say, rejecting some of it, accepting some of it, and it's a lesson in good government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Our next speaker is Mr. Madan. Mr. Madan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yes. Honorable Mayor and the council people, council members, and the staff. I've had the opportunity to work with the staff, not in the last 3-4 years, but before that. And City of Desert Hot Springs is my life, basically. I'm very well vested in City of Desert Hot Springs. As you all know, I own large parcels of land scattered all over. Even outside the City of Desert Hot Springs sphere of influence, I would like to, I had the opportunity to talk to Rebecca this morning, and it was very nice talking to her. She was very gracious. I would like to just point out one thing. I have submitted my opposition and I have submitted my requests in writing. And I'd like to make that a part. But I would like to let you know that my heart is there in Desert Hot Springs, and for its good, you whether hear it from me or not, at times I have tried to get some big, large businesses into the city. But I do find we did make an effort to develop the southeast corner of Mission Lakes and Little Morongo, a very large development we had envisioned, and the previous planning consultants had reviewed that location and had given an overlay of mixed use so that we could do various things, parks in between. It's 160 acres and it'll require a large development. Another one I'd like to make a comment on is the land which is in the sphere of influence, but not in the city, over the Mission Lakes Country Club, north of Augusta. I did hear the comments of Rebecca. It is hillside. It is a prime parcel. In fact, if you know in real estate, some of the prime parcels never get developed because they are very expensive properties and it's hard for people to own them and develop them. This parcel was left, there is a water tank over there on top, which actually was in our property, but we settled with them and we deeded it back to the Mission Springs Water District. There is also a golf course. And the golf carts just drive up there to play golf. So getting up there is not an issue. These are beautiful parcels, would be beautiful parcels overlooking the golf course of Mission Lakes Country Club. It hasn't been developed because it's not only that the development cost is expensive, I think it'll be the expensive part. I would request again that this be put back into a RL zone rather than this does not qualify as a desert land, as if away from everything else. It's in the middle of a development. Similar is the one parcel which I have adjoining Paradise Springs. That's a similar parcel. It's hillside, very rightfully, and I have written that. In fact, Rebecca is right. We could do a cluster development, which is very beneficial and which can provide views. I think as far as another issue I had was the public, I think that is going to be corrected. The last comment I have is there are the specific plans which are rightfully being canceled. Those are correct. But the ones to join the one Mountain View 2 estates, which is already a vested map, but I do not know sitting here the legal ramifications of if I was to let go of the specific plan on that, and the Arroyo Rancho del Oro Vista. Both of them, I would request that be not included in that, they not be canceled. As my understanding is from the legal sources, and actually I verified that yesterday, that once a specific plan is done, it is in perpetuity unless I and the city come to an agreement. When I say I mean Farm Investment Group LLC, which I'm a member of, and I'm the managing member of it. There's one more issue which I would like to request. The south side of Two Bunch Palm and the east side of Indian. We own some property, and I would like, there are on the west side of Indian is windmills. I would like to, I have a 30-acre parcel, and I've been thinking about putting a solar power plant on there and trying to get some adjoining property. If an overlay of energy overlay could be put on the east side of Indian, south of Two Bunch Palm, it's south of that mobile home park. That's where my parcel is. We do have the background in energy. Actually, I own some interest in the Palm Springs wind farm. And I'm very familiar. Also to let you know that I was the first one in the 1970s at Department of Water Power who started the solar program for city of Los Angeles. And we did a conservation house at Convention Center downtown when we used to use only the hot water heater. With the solar system, with the panels to heat the hot water and circulate it. That was the start of the energy, green energy projects in the city of LA. With that, I'll thank you for your attention to me. I thank you, the staff. Thank you, Rebecca, for being very kind and concerned and showing the concern. I would go along with your thinking about the clusters. That's a good thought. We have some other locations in other places. We have that being done. I mean, that's to name, it's in Chino Hills, which is being proposed over there. But when you go to 5-acre clusters, I also understand that the zoning further goes 50%. If you were to do cluster, and that's what happened in Chino Hills. I didn't own it, adjoining parcel, 500 acres. They had 107 lots. And once they wanted to do a cluster, somewhere in the books is written that the zoning has to be 50%. Now, all these legal issues come up. I'm not an expert on all of them, but I would request that especially on the Augusta lot above, which is the above the Mission Lakes Country Club. That parcel is very dear to me. I've been thinking about putting beautiful homes next to the golf course, overlooking the golf course. And one home per 5 acres is, that's like in boondocks. This is not a boondock. This is not, there may be some fire issues. It is a hillside, of course. So our
Mr. Madan, you're kind of going in circles now and then repeating yourself. So I'd like you to wrap it up if you can.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mayor Mattis. I believe our density may not be like 3 or 4 to an acre, but we could definitely do beautiful homes, 1 per acre. I would like the Ms. Deming to consider it. I like the staff and the councilman to consider it. And with that, I thank you for giving the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you so much for your comments today. Our next speaker, Joe.
Next three speakers is Donovan Collier, followed by Betty Cordova, followed by John Aboud.
Donovan, are you there? Donovan, I see you're on the screen, but you're going to have to unmute yourself. If you're on the phone, *06. Is that correct? Just *6?
Mm-hmm.
Or unmute yourself if you're on Zoom. All right, we'll go back to Donovan. Betty? Betty, if you can unmute yourself. Okay, Betty, we'll come back to you. John? John Aboud, you there? All right, what's the next speakers?
Next three is John, I'm going to spell it Soibatain, followed by Tracy Smith, followed by Craig Fry.
John, are you there?
I'm here. I don't have any comments, but just listening into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you very much.
interested in developing in the area, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Tracy Smith? Tracy, any comments? All right. Next speaker, who was that, Joe?
The next speaker is Craig Fry. I do not see him in the list of attendees, but there are three people that are joining via phone. Mr. Mayor, we can call on them individually if you would like.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
This is Craig Fry.
Oh, Craig, there you go. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Hi, my name's Craig Fry, and first of all, I'd like to thank planning staff for all their help. Patricia has done nothing but great for helping us come into your city. We're looking at bringing our business into the city. We're with Upward Housing, and what we're looking for is very specific, and she recommended that we get in front of the council. We're looking at purchasing a piece of property on Hacienda Avenue that right now is currently zoned as a VS. And she recommended that we discuss with you at this first meeting and probably your next one that since we are abutting to a RVS, that this one very specific piece of property be looked at to change its zoning. And what we would like to do is bring in a transitional housing. We would be willing to work with the city to, we know we'd be losing some of the bed tax, but we'd work with the city to augment that missing income in order to provide additional services inside the city. So again, we thank the staff and thank you for your considerations and ready for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Craig. Our next
Before
speaker.
we move on, can I
Yes.
get an APN number from that gentleman?
Craig, do you have the APN number?
Yes. Yeah, right now, the address is 67485, and I can send it to you via email, the APN number, if that would be all right.
The address was fine. It was 67485 Hacienda.
Yes, I got the APN. It's 642-164007.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Okay, thank you.
Next comment, Joe?
Okay, I'm going to call on Brad Leiden next.
Brad, are you there? Move to the next speaker, Joe.
Okay, I'm going to call on the phone number ending in 3499 next.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Mr. Bouvet.
Okay.
From earlier.
Next speaker.
Okay, next I'm going to call on phone number ending in 8242.
Is anyone at that phone would like to speak and just identify yourself? 760-413-8242.
Mr. Mayor, this is Mike Roy. I don't have anything to speak about. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you very much. Is that our last speaker, Gerald?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll go back through the list one last time to make sure everybody had an opportunity. Susan Boyer, are you on the line? You see her anywhere, Gerald?
No.
How about Susan Miller? Susan, are you able to unmute yourself? I see you on this.
Okie doke.
There you go. Gotcha. All right. It's all yours, Susan.
Hello. It's hard enough to be there in front of you versus clicking to see you.
It's all,
Okay.
it's a nightmare for all of us right now, but we're getting through it.
Okay. Yeah, we will get through it. I'm looking forward to it. I have 3 issues. The first one was I couldn't really see the general plan or the zoning maps very well on the computer. I needed printouts just because my vision isn't the best, and I couldn't see some of the streets. I had problems not having well, anyway, not having the maps as we used to have the maps, just having them electronically. So I wasn't able to see a lot of the different things, but let me just get to, that's just a comment. Number 1, I have a lot on Dillon Road, and it's 666-280-002. And it is actually a very small lot. And it is going to be commercial. Because it's so small, it's kind of going to be non-conforming with some of the commercial uses. Well, that in itself is scary because I don't want to lose the lot, but commercial has different setbacks and different aspects than residential does. So I'm hoping that I can certainly put food truck rentals or something that will fit into a very, very long, skinny lot. And also some of the lots are very small on Dillon, and you know, nobody wants to lose them. So that's question number 1. Should I proceed with question number 2?
Yes, ma'am. We can't answer your questions during the
That's
public
right.
comments,
Okay.
so please just number them and
It's
keep
the
going.
format. It's the format, you guys. I'm dealing with it, okay?
No worries.
Now, also, item number 2 is I have shared with Rebecca during the last maybe few weeks that our surrounding communities, as in Palm Springs and the county of Riverside, have created a monster with conflicts. There are zoning maps, but there are usually 2 zonings now for a lot of these very small properties. And I just want to make sure that we do not create the same kind of monster with 2 different zonings. If you have 2 different zonings in the county, what you have to do is you have to go to the Board of Supervisors and the councils and pay an enormous amount to get one of the zonings removed. I just want to make sure that Desert Hot Springs is not the next, you know, nightmare with conflicts of maps. So that's it.
All right. Thank you for your comments today. We'll see if we can get those answered for you. I skipped over Michael. I didn't get the last name.
Oh,
Was it Michael? Is that your mic, Susan?
That's my mic. Yes,
All
and he's having problems, audio problems like I did.
Did he need to make any comments?
Oh no, he enveloped his in mine.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll mark them off the list. All right. Our next speaker is Patrick, and I didn't get the last name.
Alpering.
Patrick, are you there?
I do not see him.
Okay. Martin Bunning.
I do not see him either.
Okay. Mr. Frazier.
Nope, he's not here.
Is it Donovan?
Donovan.
Is that who? Yeah, Donovan, there it is. Donovan, I see you on the screen. Do you have a way to unmute yourself, and did you have any comments? Donovan, if you're using the phone, it's #6. Oh, I'm sorry, *6?
*6.
All right, Donovan, at this time, we're gonna, we'll give you one last chance at the end. Betty Cordova? Betty, do you have any comments? Okay, John Abud? John, did you have any comments? Tracy Smith?
Tracy Smith is not here.
Was there Brad? I didn't get the last name. Was it Brad Leiden?
No, I don't have a Brad.
There, no, okay. All right, is there anyone else that would like to make public comments that have been called on, have not? You can raise your hand with *9, was it, Gerald?
Yes.
Pressing *9 on your phone. If for some reason someone is able to get a hold of city clerk, jump back in. Because of the way our meeting's set up, I will go back and reopen public comments, but that's only for speakers that have been called on now. That is no new speakers going forward. At this time, I'll close the public hearing, and we're going to move to council member discussions. And I'll just go backwards this time. Mr. Griffith. Actually, before you start, Mr. Griffith, I'm going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back with comments. I apologize to everybody. Some of us might need to stretch and everything, so I'm going to have everybody, if you want to put yourself on mute. Gerald, can you stop the live, or we're going to continue live? We can't hear you, Gerald. You're muted.
I can keep the live going, but I'll put up a slide that says that we're in recess.
Okay, so make sure everybody mutes yourself, and we're taking a 10-minute break. It is 2:45. We'll come back at 2:55. All right, let me see if I got all the council members back here. I got Mr. Gardner, Ms. Pye. Mr. Betts, are you back? I see Mr. Griffith. All right, we'll call back to order the meeting, and I'll start again with, actually, one clarification, Ms. Mariah, there was a question about specific plans by Mr. Betts, and since that's a legal question, we'll be discussing this obviously in this round. Could you address that?
Sure. The issue was as to whether or not how we go ahead and either rescind or adopt new specific plans. The government code requires that a specific plan be rescinded or amended the same way as it's adopted. So we adopted it via resolution and hearings, and so therefore we could rescind it via resolution and hearings, which is what is being proposed.
Thank you.
And
Mr.
Mayor, did you want me to address all the other questions first before you comment, or do?
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. That's why we pay you the big bucks there, Ms. Denny. Why don't you go address those questions? I might answer some questions, and then we'll get to Mr. Griffith. I promise, Mr. Griffith, I'll get to you.
So I think most of the comments that we saw were really just comments and not really questions. We did have the discussion, as was talked about, for the specific plan, and some changes there regarding their parcels and the clustering. One of the things that I looked up on the break was that we are actually recommending a change based on that comment. Our general plan does allow for clustering. However, the residential standard still has a 5-acre minimum. So our recommendation is to leave it at the 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, but have the lot minimum as 1 acre. That way we can allow for clustering in streets and whatnot. But I also wanted to comment on that piece of parcel that he was referring to. It actually is in the county. So if he develops it without annexing, he'd still follow the county standards and not the city standards. But if he was able to do an annexation out there, then it would follow our city standards. But we saw that as a cleanup that we should take care of at this meeting as well.
Mr. Mayor, can I interrupt for a moment, please? I need to know what parcel she's referring to.
Yes,
and as we go through this, if we could go be very deliberate when we're speaking about a parcel, because I got to find it on a map and get my head around what we're talking about. So which parcel are we talking about?
Let me go ahead and share my screen and so when he's referring to the open space that we have as rural desert, sorry, it's going a little slowly here.
And we're referring to Mr. Medan's comments.
Correct. So I can go through the other comments that were just requests to show you the parcels, but this one specifically had a question. He was referring to this lot he has that we have designated in the draft land use as rural desert, that he would like to see it changed to residential. One of the reasons that we did it as rural is because of all of the hillsides and the high fire zone. But as he said, you know, he would be good with 1 acre lots and clustering. And I think even with our zoning map, we can, or zoning code, we can address that with a quick cleanup and make sure that the intent is understood.
And that's currently in the county, that area.
But it is currently in the county. So it wouldn't even follow, if you were to develop it today, if you didn't apply for annexation, it would just be developed under county standards, not city standards. I can bring up the RV, but the request wasn't necessarily specific to a parcel. It was more.
Can you stick with Mr. Medan's comments? So
that was there other ones?
I think you were referring
that you'd like me to address? The other ones were a change in I can do the private, the institution ones. That way it's clear that we are recommending to be changed. So these are an error on staff's part. There are 3 lots here. This one, and his lot down here that are identified as the public institution that we are recommending being changed to residential low to match the surrounding area. He also had some other ones that he was requesting changes on. Those are he was requesting this one that is currently designated as RL. I believe this one as well. He was looking at doing some sort of mixed use corridor. However, as I previously stated, our concerns with changing those would actually increase the intensity of the project and affect the EIR. I don't think we're opposed to a project there, and they would have to do an environmental documentation for the project, and they could incorporate a general plan and zoning update at the same time as we saw the project. The biggest issue would be the EIR with that request. Same with the other two. If you'd like me to show you them, they are going from RD. They're requesting to go from RD to RL. One of them I showed you. The other is right near that one as well. It is, and this parcel as well that he was asking to be changed to RL. Again, as you can see in the background, it's quite a bit of hillsides, and that's why, and high fire, that we originally recommended it as RD when we first came to council for that workshop in January, February.
Is that all his comments?
I believe those are all his parcels, correct, other than the comments regarding these specific plans that we...
Can you go to Ms. Miller's comments next?
Yes. So Ms. Miller had some concerns. This is the parcel she's referring to. Had some concerns that the parcels here on Dillon are small, and they are. And it would, in our code under the food trucks, allow for a food truck park. She could apply for a development permit for a food truck park. She asked about the printouts. I did email her twice the digital files so she could take them to like the UPS store and print them out. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we aren't taking customers at the counter. So we weren't able to accommodate her on that printout, but I did make sure that she had it digitally so that she could print herself at home. And then she commented on conflicts between zoning and the general plan. Obviously, the benefit of us doing this all at once is that we're ensuring that there is no conflict between the zoning and the general plan. Obviously, there could be conflicts between our general plan and the county's general plan in our sphere of influence, but that if you're located in the sphere, you would go by the counties and not the cities. It would be purely the county. When we put a general plan designation in our sphere of influence, we're basically telling people that if you want to annex to the city, this is our vision for the property. And so it doesn't create a conflict. It can be different, but she was really concerned. She says in the county that they've got a zoning designation that conflicts with their general plan designation, and that they are forcing their property owners to go through a zone change to make it in conformance with the general plan. And obviously staff went through this entire process to ensure that we had a zoning map in compliance with their general plan. So I don't really have any other comment for her.
Mr. Lang's comments? That was the 20th in Little Morongo.
Yeah, so he was requesting to go from industrial, or to go, his process went from industrial to rural desert. He is in the MSHCP area. So that direction came from council at the workshop, and that's why that was changed at the request and per the agreement with CVAG for MSHCP, making sure that we're conserving all of the conservation areas as best we can. Can
you show that parcel?
Yes. Let me pull up his email. I didn't write down a parcel number.
It's at 20th in Little Morongo, if that helps.
I don't remember if I think it's this one. Yeah, it's this one right here.
So that's in the MSHCP.
It's in the MSHCP conservation area designation, correct?
And that's the reason it's designated there. Okay.
That's correct.
Mr. Bouvet's comments about
Is
the
mi-
RV?
Yeah, he was just asking you guys to allow through a conditional use permit in our code in the mixed use corridor zoning. And so that's again at the direction of council if you'd like to allow RVs in that zoning designation.
Mr. Noble's comments about adding that language at the end that Palm Springs did, do you see a problem with that? And is all the language that he used in the overlay that they used in the Planning Commission in this document?
So in the document that you have is what was recommended by Planning Commission. He wrote an additional letter asking for additional language in both the energy overlay and in the public facilities. Staff has no concerns with adding the language that he has asked for in the energy overlay. It is a little specific to wind when we're trying to make it an energy, but we don't really see we don't see a conflict in any other part of the general plan. We are not recommending at this time to make the changes to the public facility definition and description, as staff does not have enough time to research what those impacts could be and whether it would affect any other section of the general plan at this time. So it's definitely something at time of annexation, if you wanted to look at that designation, that we could look at when we do the general plan map update. We could also include a review of the general plan text update if necessary at time of annexation or at time of project request.
Let's see. Mr. Fry had some comments.
So Mr. Fry asked about changing the designation, and I can pull up his property as well. I have to understand. So he has asked basically if he wants his designation, which is currently designated in our proposed zoning map as visitor serving commercial. He is looking for, based on what I understand, visitor serving mixed use. We worked through this process to try and get vacant blocks that all had, that didn't have any housing, to try and preserve them for the commercial hotel and associated uses that was our direction from council. So based on previous direction from council, staff would not recommend to change this lot from visitor serving commercial to visitor serving mixed use.
Okay. I don't have any other comments on my paper. Did I miss any?
That's all I have as well.
Okay, I'm going to start with Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so, Rebecca, just clarification, because I do have Mr. Noble's email. We said we are going to add the additional wording regarding the uses in the energy overlay area.
We can make that as part of the recommendation, absolutely.
I would recommend that. I was trying to find a way to be all encompassing, thinking like environmental resources or something, but he supplied us with the wording, so I think that might be pretty good. Overall, I just want to say I think city staff did a great job. There's a lot of material here, 3,242 pages just for today's meeting, and I'll be honest, I didn't get through all 3,242 pages, but I got a lot of them. It represents a lot of work. I was on Planning Commission when we started this stuff, and have attended the Planning Commission meetings, and I have to really say what a great job city staff has done. I think Rebecca's done an outstanding job. And so I had the things that I said earlier. Right now, I don't know that I really have many questions, so I'll let everybody else ask them, okay? And again, thank you so much.
And I'll do a second round just in case you missed something. So, Mr. Betts, you're next. Can't hear you.
There you go. Amazing how that works if you take yourself off mute, huh? I want to echo Councilmember Griffith's comments regarding staff's efforts on this one. I went through this process, or started it a few years back, and it didn't move nearly as smoothly as well as this has. Couple of questions here. And I agree. So on the Mr. Noble's concerns regarding the language, we've got that. That's going to incorporate any possible future use that could come along rather than limiting it to everything we can see now.
So we do have a section in our code that allows for me to make a similar use determination on any use, not just energy uses. So if we feel that a use that's being proposed is similar to something on the allowable chart list, we can make that determination. The other option is when we run into issues, we've always come back to council and just amended the list as needed. We're pretty flexible about bringing, you know, anything we see that's missing or whatnot when we have a project coming. Similar to the convenience store ordinance you guys saw, we saw an issue, we brought it to council, as fast as we're able to. So we're pretty flexible and business friendly. And so if we find we can't make a similar use determination, we have other ways of bringing it to council for that change if necessary.
Okay, I certainly appreciate staff doing that, and you've got technical considerations you have to worry about. My preference is always to make sure we put in some sort of catch-all that when something is obvious, but we can't see it, and the preference sometimes have been to specifically list everything, and if it wasn't in that list, then we can't do it. So if there's something in there, as long as we've got the language, then, and I'm comfortable that we would include that. I think I'd agree with Councilmember Griffith on including that language. Now, on the Medan property that's up on the hill, if this was a particularly, remote scenic area, I would say, maybe this isn't suitable for a designation of residential low. And that rural desert would fit. But I don't see this as an area here that I think there's something that could complement the city and help increase, bring in some higher end homes if they're properly built, where they're terraced and where one house looks at the view over the roof of the house on the street below it through a picture window. And then the house that's on the downside slope would be looking out a picture window out there back. I grew up in a neighborhood like that with a view of LA. And, that ended up increasing the property value significantly. It seems to me like it's a significant loss of very valuable land to not be able to put in at least a residential development that's going to match that. And that limiting it to only one house per acre, even with the changes, or one house per 5 acres, even with the changes that you mentioned, is not taking full advantage. Some of our best properties are the ones that have the best views, and we're sitting here with a view and we're just not fully taking advantage of it. Again, if this was off in some area where view wasn't a major consideration, but right there, that's pretty highly developed already. So I'd very much encourage the council to look at that and say, I think we can find the best use for that would be just slightly higher density so that we got people who can move in for view homes, the type when you open up the door, you say, wow, what a spectacular view. This is truly a view house. This is $1 million view, and not just have that be limited to one house per 5 acres. So I'm not in agreement with that. In addition to the land that's around Jalisco that was designated as public institutional by mistake, I think we've got some park area there, a wash. I don't think Medan, does he own that wash? That'd be the wash between the two sections of Rancho Del Oro.
Those are not ones that are proposed to be updated. Those show City of Desert Hot Springs ownership, and those are staying public facilities. There's probably a wash that goes through their property, but it has not changed ownership yet.
So I'm confused then. Public facilities would be different. I mean, that would be inclusive of somebody's going to put in a park.
Rebecca, could you pull up the map? It might make it easier.
Yep, I'm trying to get to it first before I pull.
Mr. Best has a point. There's a park slated for that area.
And this question would be true of anywhere in the city where we've given the same treatment, designated it as public institutional. Do we have this? I'm looking for a specific listing on here that shows open space recreational park. Yeah, there it is. So it would be the forest green color. I see some of that over here.
So yes, so we do have some park, designations that can be designated as park as well. This is one of the parcels that we were referring to. Yes, there is drainage through the middle, but because it hasn't been, we have created a separate parcel. But this one to the south does say City of Desert Hot Springs, and therefore we are proposing to leave that public facilities.
That piece and the next one to the south.
And the next one to the south, correct.
Yeah, that was slated as a park at one time.
Public facilities can be a park, or we can change the entire, it can be a mix. We've got both the open space designation and the public facility designation.
Hello? Hey, Mr. Mayor, can you move on to somebody else quickly and get back to me, please?
Sure. Ms. Pye, you're next.
I basically don't have any comments. I read all of the information we received today. I read everything that was sent to the Planning Commission. So I'm clear. The only thing different, I think we should do the amendment for Mr. Griffith's change. And I only see two, but there was one for Mr. Madden where he talked about Indian and 2 bunch palms. Did we answer that question?
We did not. That is actually in the county that he's speaking of, but we could have Rebecca answer that question. He was proposing to annex that as wind or energy.
Okay, no question.
Okay.
I'm done, thank you.
All right, Mr. Gardner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just double check real quick, Rebecca, that property that's above Mission Lakes that we were talking about, that the density, that's still in the county, correct?
That is correct.
So yeah, and so then it falls into the if it ever wanted to be annexed, they would have to consider our zoning as opposed to the county one. Now, under the county's zoning, can he build more there than what the city zoning would be?
I wouldn't be able to answer that without looking up.
Okay.
Zoning.
I was just curious on that. But yeah, that one I think I agree with staff on that. I do have to say the overall thing. This is a very impressive document that the staff and our consultants have come up with. It's going to guide us for the future. It's very well thought out. It has a lot of flexibility in it, some very forward thinking. Like Mr. Griffith, I was on the Planning Commission when we started this process. I've been involved with it since the beginning. We've gone above and beyond with public input, I think. I spent the long holiday weekend reading this. There's a lot of reading, and thank goodness we had a holiday weekend to do it with a pandemic. Gave us time to read and understand and absorb all of that, and I really do appreciate all of the hard work that went into it. I do also want to really point out a couple of things. One of the things I really do like in this document are the streamlined changes that you put into it, like the administrative CUPs. I think that will go an awful long way towards streamlining development, getting things through. They're not going to have to necessarily minor things that aren't going to have to go through the Planning Commission or through the council, that you can handle administratively. I think that'll be a great addition to this. The new tables, I think, also are very, very easy to read and understand, even for a non-developer like myself. So I thought you did a great job on that. I did one comment that we did get raised, some strong concern of mine, and that was the changing from of that one parcel from visitor serving to a bigger aspect of that. I think it points out very clearly the rationale and the need for having our spa preservation ordinance developed, and I'm looking forward to having that come with us. But I would certainly oppose changing that at this time to an expanded definition. But other than that, I'll just say a great job to everybody involved, Rebecca, all of our consultants, the Planning Commission. It's a great document, and I'm looking forward to adopting it and moving ahead. That's it.
I'm going to make my comments, and I just want to say to everybody, we are in a public meeting, so if you are going to take an emergency phone call, please take your video off as you're stepping off the dais to take that call in public. So just to let everybody know that if you're taking a phone call, you're taking it on public time, and we prefer you not to do that. We do have Brown Act regulations that we still need to adhere to. With that said, my comments are pretty simple. I really enjoyed the map. It's just so much more easy to read. I think Rebecca made that comment with MIG when we were met in our meetings, that we just needed to streamline the map a little better and make it a little more readable and easy to read. There were so many times that I would pull up the map and we were just trying to decipher exactly what that meant. And so I think now it's very clear in a lot of areas on what that means and how you can develop. And I want to reiterate that just because we move forward today and you're not happy with it doesn't mean that zoning changes can't happen. We can have, I believe, by law up to 4 a year. Is that correct?
We can have up to 4 general plan changes.
General plan, yes.
As it relates, if it's just a zoning change, we can do that anytime.
So there's opportunities. This is a map for us to kind of guide our staff through, and there's definitely opportunity here for changes to happen in the future. It's not set in stone, but this is definitely a map that had to be done, and we need to be able to guide our city. I wanted to thank again from MIG. The realistic population numbers are much more realistic. When I first read the general plan, when I first got on council in 2004, I just thought, wow, we're going to explode as a city. And I mean, in 2007, when I joined the council, we're going to explode as a city. And how are we going to be able to build over the next 10, 20 years? And obviously with the recession and everything else slowed us a lot down, but it's really more realistic if you look at those numbers now. If the economy is in a good position, we can grow at those numbers, and that's something we can really plan on doing in the future. Let's see. Miss Miller had a comment, Rebecca, on being able to use like food trucks and other things like that, and I want to make sure we were clear on the answer for her. That would be something that she could do in that area. She's trying to figure out a way to use that small parcel. The way it's zoned today, with her suggestions, she could probably do something like that if she had applied correctly.
That's correct. Our food truck ordinance allows for commercial properties to apply to do a food truck park where they would be able to stay there permanently, or they could rent it out and rotate as well.
Okay. Referring to Mr. Noble's comments, I wanted to make sure that Mr. Griffith was, that's what he was thinking. Was that the letter that he sent was incorporated, that the Planning Commission adopted. I like the catch-all, which was any other use consistent with general plan that Palm Springs is using. I don't know, is that something we could use that could be the catch-all? I know you do have the authority to change a lot of it, but do you have any heartache with that, Ms. Deming?
So yeah, staff has some concern because there's, an example where that could be an issue is that the general plan is very general. That's basically saying any, for commercial, that any commercial use would be fine, where we may not be comfortable with any commercial use. That's why we list the uses in the zoning map and why we try to, get an all-encompassing list that we can use. It's still a similar use determination. So, if it's a certain type of store that's not specifically listed, we can say, oh, that's similar to retail, and make that determination where it's not permitted. But if there's a use, there are uses that we may not want to permit in every commercial zone. That's why we do different designations. The RV storage is a good example. Do we want that in mixed use? It's allowed under the general plan, but we've specifically didn't want it in our zoning code. And so that's where that question, that concern would come up.
Mr. Griffin, can you kind of clarify what you were stating on that?
Yeah. in the email, let me get it here. So one of the things that Mr. Noble brought up was talking about, they call it sequestering, carbon dioxide sequestering facilities, which hydrogen production and carbon dioxide sequestering facilities. That's not something that we currently have now. It is something that I know he said, I think he said there's a company from Switzerland. I know that there are some German companies that are also looking at that kind of technology. And I would imagine it's probably something that is going to, maybe not in the near future, but in the future, something that is definitely going to be an industry that you're going to see starting, given the issues of climate change and ways of trying to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to reduce warming. And so that's what he says is basically looking for hydrogen production and carbon dioxide sequestering facilities and infrastructure related thereto. I think given the area, that might be a good fit. So that's why I was looking at, again, something all encompassing, but I think that kind of might pass.
I didn't see the whole planning commission, but are you stating that the planning commission had basically adopted that kind of language that you was trying to pass?
I don't believe they adopted that. I don't believe that was in the, I think, if memory serves me, he did comment on the planning commission. He said that he had some initial concerns and spoke to Doria and city staff and was very happy with things at that time. And then I think maybe afterwards, that's when this came up. This email was just sent to us. Let me see. This is dated May 22nd, so it's after the planning commission.
So I have a suggestion. Why don't we add to our, on your guys' exhibit, it would be exhibit 9, industrial districts. We can add a line item in there under other uses that specifically says other energy producing uses is not permitted in IL and is a CUP in IE.
And
so we've got a catch-all for the IE zone there.
What I'm trying to get at is that they have billions and billions of dollars invested in that area and possibly investments in the future. And for companies to come from Switzerland or other areas, they've got to make sure that the proper language is set for this zone if we ever do annex that area. So I'm just trying to make sure we cover all bases and that we're friendly about this because it would refer back to us. I'm understanding if go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't believe that the, carbon dioxide sequestering is actually energy production. It is more of an environmental resource technology. So I would be a little concerned about only keeping it to energy production, since that's not producing energy. It's actually extracting carbon dioxide from the air.
Ms. Murray and Ms. Williams, you guys were shaking heads. Did you have any extra comments on that?
Rebecca, do you have any additional comments?
No, but I thought the intent was to use that to make energy, is to use the carbon dioxide in the air and convert it to energy. So that's why I would probably classify something like that as an energy production.
Well, as Mr. Noble is the expert in that area, I just want to make sure we're capturing the language. Planning Commission agreed to it for the most part. The only question is that last little bit that you're worried about, right, Ms. Demi?
So there's two things. Let me pull up his letter.
Well, you're pulling that up. Mr. Noble, during his public comment, he did make a statement, and I think it is relevant. You know, he talked about the fact that technology is changing all of the time, and what we currently know about renewable energy, that may advance quite quickly in the next several years. And there was some language, Rebecca, that he had asked for that kind of was a catch-all to encompass that. Can you look for that in the letter?
Yes, I'm working on it right now.
So it doesn't necessarily permit everything under the sun, but it leaves it open enough where we're kind of being forward thinking with it.
So the language that he had proposed was any other use consistent with general plan, but Rebecca's a little nervous about that.
Yeah. So there is a concern because that could mean any designation I think if we can say some sort of within the general, I'm trying to figure out how we combine it within the general plan language versus the zoning language, because our zoning language is where the uses are shown versus the general plan language. And so what I'm
When's the final draft come back to us?
you would, this would be the final draft other than the second reading of the ordinance approving the zoning.
But before the second reading of the ordinance, could you clarify this, or does it need to be clarified today?
It needs to be clarified today.
Okay.
So let me share my screen and explain what my recommendation will be. So staff doesn't have, so basically we have this letter. These are the requested changes to the energy overlay that are different than what, these are additional changes that he's requesting from what Planning Commission recommended. What you have is minus, I believe, the highlighted area, and staff is okay with these changes and willing to recommend these changes for approval that are specifically the changes to the energy overlay. Okay. His comment on the map is included. Staff has concerns regarding the public facility, and then he made the other verbal comment regarding the catch-all, which is where I was trying to word a catch-all in our zoning ordinance under the IE zone. It wouldn't be necessarily specific to his property because he's not in the city and we don't zone properties not located in the city. But we could try and word right now a catch-all in that Exhibit 9 industrial districts that cover those kind of facilities, other energy type facilities that would be a conditional use permit to the Planning Commission in the IE zone. And then that would kind of cover that catch-all specific and only specific to that IE zone, and not a full catch-all that all uses not considered are permitted if the general plan allows for them.
All right, if you want to work on that, I got a couple more quick questions.
Okay.
The RV storage, as Mr. Bouvet alluded to, what was the reason can we do that? Or I remember there was a reason that we didn't do that, or you were advising against it at one point.
I actually don't have necessarily an advisement against it. It's what you look at the map and just understand that if you allow it in the, mixed use corridor, that anyone would be able to apply for it throughout these mixed use zones that could be prime, commercial or mixed use designations. Our current code only allowed it in the industrial, so staff did was to add an allowance in the commercial business park zone, because that area is a little bit more of a mix of very, very light industrial and commercial. And that's where my understanding, the direction from council was they wanted to see those uses in an industrial area, not in our commercial areas. So
he could come back and ask for that to be rezoned, just that one parcel, right?
There are some obviously requirements with spot zoning. You don't usually want to just change one parcel. You'll want to change a couple of them, or clean it up at the same time. I believe his parcel is, obviously it's next to another one, but I would suggest, so that we would leave one hanging, that we try and maybe change all three with the, at that time.
I mean, I would be consistent if we change that area. I just don't want to open up all mixed use, obviously. But if
that would be the concern, correct? So
could you show the map on that?
Yeah, that's what I was. Right, sorry, I was working on pulling that up for you.
And then I'm just going to make a general comment while you're doing that about Mr. Lang's property. And Mr. Lang, I don't know if you are still listening or not, but I don't know if you realize that you're in the multi-species habitat plan, and that's very difficult to develop in at this time. There is possibilities of development in the future on that land, but that's not something that we control at this time. We do not control where the multi-species habitat plan goes, and I'm sorry it goes through your property.
Share my screen. So this is the property he's referring to. At a minimum, I would recommend that we would take all three properties if we were going to change a zone and change it to commercial business park, so that we're not just doing a single lot, or even if we were to do the two, because it's already a U-Haul facility, that we wouldn't leave a stranded parcel in the mixed use zone. So, that would be
Makes sense.
staff's recommendation as a common sense
Rebecca,
review.
This is Jose. Can I bring up something?
Yes, Jose, go ahead.
The housing element does identify one or two of those sites as part of the regional housing needs assessment sites. So we would like to be very careful. If we do make those changes there, we have to adjust those in the housing element and find other sites to meet those 7,500 housing units. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you very much for that comment.
And I think the concern still is changing it to a straight commercial use is possibly a higher density and could also affect the EIR. But I think what we were saying is a future change with the request with those property owners signing off, I think is something we could review. And at the time, if it requires our housing element update or when it comes through, we might be in the process of the new housing element and we'll be able to rearrange those units on the updated housing element as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That's, if you could work on that language for Mr. Noble's property.
And Rebecca, I just sent you something. If you could take a look at it regarding the catch-all and see if that would work on.
And I'm gonna, while you guys are doing that, if we can go back to the regular screen there, Rebecca.
Can I weigh in on this one, Mr. Mayor?
You're gonna be here in 10 seconds as soon as Rebecca gets us off that screen and back on the main screen.
Okay.
You're up next as I'm done. All right, Mr. Betts, it's all yours.
Okay, so back to that screen. It was my understanding we're changing all the general plan map to accommodate RV storage, or
I did not make that recommendation. I was just asking the question.
Okay, because it sounded like Rebecca was saying that we could do that, but that's an open question right now, right?
That's just an open question. I did not make a motion to do that.
Okay, so that's what I was talking about before when we go through this. If we can specifically list each one of these when we make the motion so everybody's clear, that'd be great. On the energy, the future energy zone in the sphere, we had a memo that was called up, and I don't know if it's necessary to go through that step by step. I have the thing in front of me now, but Rebecca had that on the screen. Can we go through that? Is there a need to go through that slowly so that we can see what language it is that we want included and don't want included, or what it is that that you have?
I'll be happy to go over what I'm hearing and what our recommendation would be. And so that is.
And if we could call out page numbers on that memo so we know where we're at, or go slowly.
So basically starting on page 3 of the PDF.
Okay, so I'm at the thing that says energy overlay discussion. Right there, I got the same page.
Yep.
And the first thing that's highlighted is the word generating.
Correct.
Is that a word he wants inserted?
Yes, that's my understanding. Correct.
Did you have a problem with that?
I have no problem with any of the areas inserted that I have highlighted here.
Okay, so go on to the problems where we do. What do we have problem with?
So this one is a request to make sure that the map is incorporated, which it is in 2 places on our agenda. One is a standalone land use policy map, and the second is within the general plan document. So it is included in your approval as the proposed map. The second, he's asking for us to update our definitions of public facilities. Staff is not recommending this change at this time in any of these highlighted areas here on page 5, due to the fact that the city doesn't, I have not had a chance from this original letter that came in right before the Planning Commission meeting and discussion in the last month to really do the research on how that might impact the city changing these public utility definitions. So staff is not recommending that change. If it's something that's necessary at the time that he's looking to annex, it can be part of a general plan amendment at that time if needed.
Yeah. So I think the issue we have here is that everybody's clear. If some people they may be clear in their mind what it is they want to leave open as a possibility, but the other side of that is something may come along that we would make that change and would allow something that we wouldn't want to be there. Is that basically what you're saying?
So, and then the other question that he brought up verbally was a catch-all requirement in our zoning, is my understanding. And I am in favor of doing some sort of energy catch-all in our zoning code under industrial uses. That way we catch any type of energy related or energy generating or energy capturing uses so that no one feels that we're leaving it out. Just because we only list, solar and wind doesn't mean our intent isn't for other energy type uses in our industrial energy zone.
Okay, so one of those energy uses could be converting trash to electricity, right?
It could be.
Which,
With that catch-all, it would allow that
okay,
conditional use permit.
So that could mean big piles of trash imported from Los Angeles for an incinerator and stockpiled upwind of the city, right?
Well, there's also recycling facilities, so there and it would still be a conditional use permit to the.
But sticking to my one example, if we just do an open catch-all, we could have all of LA's trash coming and being stockpiled upwind of us, and that would be an example of something that we would want to take a very close look at, right?
Yes, somebody could come up with some other idea to produce energy if we do a catch-all that hasn't been considered specifically that we don't like. You're correct.
So that's the risk of doing a catch-all. And the downside of not doing something is that we're making it cumbersome to put in something that we all want.
Correct. So it could delay the process. As I mentioned, if we get a specific use that isn't covered, that staff feels is a good use for the city, we have brought that forward through the Planning Commission and Council process as needed if for some reason we couldn't normally make that similar use determination. That usually delays a project by 3 months, maybe 3 or 4 months, just because of the noticing timeline and how long it takes to get through a Planning Commission and Council, second reading of an ordinance, and 30 days to go into effect. So it does delay it a little bit, but it's not an impossible delay. A big project like something like that would require environmental, and we'd be able to kind of bring that ordinance back at the same time that they're working on their project if we got that request and staff felt it was something that made sense for the city.
Okay, so 2 more questions along that line. Are you going to be able to craft something in the scope and the time we have between now and the meeting, or is this something that we need to come back to later? Or as the mayor asked, is this something that can be, you said it needs to be taken up now in the first reading. So are you going to go off camera and busily start writing? Or
I've already been writing most of them. The biggest question I have at this point is, does council want a catch-all energy in the code or not? If another option to do is they're not in the city at this time. They are part of an annexation. Part of what we've put as a process that we are working on is a zoning code, a comprehensive zoning code update. So that's something that when we go out, we're planning on going out to RFP and hiring a professional firm to do a full comprehensive zoning code update. That's something I can put on our list to make them look at other cities and how they handle that and bring back some options or solutions when we do the comprehensive update over the next couple years that we're proposing to do.
Okay. Was I able to convince you otherwise on your recommendation regarding Medan's RD versus RL?
Unfortunately, no. We would have concerns if we increase any intensity on any lot due to our EIR. I completely agree with you that the city would support that general plan change, but it would need to be under a separate application with its own environmental, because we don't want to have it have an impact on our EIR that we've prepared for today.
Okay, and I think everybody recognizes there's some larger issues that you have your head around that we have to pay attention to. So
yes, we've had comments, we've had requests from him and at the Planning Commission that we absolutely support the change. We feel that it makes sense. Unfortunately, at this point in the process, we don't want to affect that EIR. It would have, had we gotten those requests at the previous meeting, where you guys directed the city to use this land use map to move forward with our EIR, we would have been able to incorporate that into the EIR. At this point, we kind of need to let the property owners stand on their own to do their general plan and zoning change if it's going to increase the intensity. And I think on a lot of those like that one, staff would support that change. We don't see a big concern with it. The nice thing also about directing the applicants to do it is they can do it at the same time that they bring their project together. So you're not just seeing a general change, you're seeing the change along with what kind of project they want to do. And so that way that decision can be made, in at the same time as looking at the project.
Soya Gardens, not in the city now. I imagine we could annex that at any time. We've got that as residential low up to 6 dwelling units per acre. they're probably, what are they at now? Are you familiar with that, 1 per acre now? And they've always been big on, having horse lots and remaining as they are when they annex into the city. And I don't particularly have a problem with it being that little island of different, not surround, but if you allow that to be residential low up to 6 dwelling units per acre, and then you start inserting that into that development, now you got people with horses next to people in a housing development. It goes together like roosters in the middle of a neighborhood.
So I think the concern there is if we make the change that we discussed to going to 1 acre minimums, they would be in between our current classifications. Residential low, they're smaller than the rural desert, but they're bigger than the residential low. So
Okay.
we don't have a category to put them in
All
that
right.
sense.
I think in the larger scheme of things, you guys have done a great job here. Everything here is going to start to get into maybe some nitpicking. Anything else I would have from here on out that I think we're okay. We've had a long meeting here. So I want to thank you for your answers to the questions. Very fortunate to have you on our staff and able to answer things so quickly and so well. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I'm gonna go through a second round here and then let Rebecca gather her thoughts and maybe help with any amendments or the resolution here before we do these, take motions on these resolutions. Mr. Gardner?
I just wanted to reiterate and make sure that I see where we were with a couple of things that I would not be supporting. I can't support changing the designation and allowing for RV storage in mixed use. That just opens up a lot of worms. I don't know how we're going to address that in here, or if we're going to wait until they decide to develop the property there and then bring it forward at that time. I can't really support the catch-all for the energy stuff just because we don't know what that might all bring in, but I do think there might be a way to get close to that would satisfy that. And then the last one is I wouldn't be supportive of at all changing the visitor serving designation up there on Hacienda that would allow for rehab and transitional housing, at least not until we can get our spa preservation ordinance put together and stuff like that. So those were the 3 things that I've still been hearing on here that I haven't quite tracked whether we're going to do any or all 3 of those or if they're included in that, but those are my final comments on that. Other than that, it's a great piece of work. You guys have worked your fingers to the bone on this for the last 2 years. It looks fantastic. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of our staff and of the work you've done. And I think this is a document that would rival most of the other cities in the Valley. And so good job on that.
Yeah, and just to guide you guys on this a little bit, I'm hearing the only changes to the current recommendation by staff is the energy overlay. I haven't heard any consistency on anyone wanting to change anything else in the comments that are made. So unless I'm wrong, please bring that up during your last comments here. Ms. Pye.
What I would like to ask is if Mr. Rodriguez can pull up the screen that says what we're supposed to be approving. And Rebecca, I guess I'm going to have to ask you.
I can pull up the agenda. It's got the different resolutions associated.
No.
Oh, no, you want his?
May I finish?
Yeah, sorry.
What's in the agenda, we're approving 3 things. What he put up, we're approving 4 things. I'm asking, what are we approving?
So I believe in his, he had the housing element separate from the general plan in his list. And it's all in our motion, it's included in the full general plan. So I think that's where the confusion might have been.
Thank you.
Is that correct, Jose?
No, I only have 3. It's just the general plan amendment with the general plan land use map. Okay. There's 3 recommendations only.
But you came back, I think what you said was correct.
Okay.
Rebecca.
All right, is that all you had, Jen? Okay. Mr. Betts, did you have any last comments? Can't hear you, Mr. Bell.
I'm okay right now. The visitor serving zone, we're not changing, correct? As it's presented on.
Don't have a consensus on that one, so I'm not.
Okay, good. That's all I have.
Mr. Griffith?
The only change that I would have asked for is to change the commercial general along Palm Drive between Buena Vista and Two Bunch Palms to a mixed-use commercial, which we talked about. And so since we don't have to swap, I'm even happier. I think it's good for the city. So that would be my recommendation.
Any council members have comments to that?
I can support that. I agree, and if we can use it to leverage additional dollars to help folks in developing that, help with low income, possibly low income housing and other things along there, and it helps with our RHNA numbers and it helps with our housing element piece as well. So yeah, I completely spaced on that one. I apologize, Mr. Griffith, but yeah, I'm wholeheartedly in favor of doing that.
I agree.
Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Deming, do you guys have any problems with that?
No, I don't.
It's not going to change our timelines?
No, we discussed it with MIG ahead of time, and we were prepared for that and have no concerns.
All right. Any staff members have any last comments before I go back to Ms. Deming to kind of tie all this together for us?
So I didn't have a consensus on whether council would like the catch-all energy language in our zoning ordinance or not. And so I can draft the recommendation.
I would prefer that you do your study with what you have to do. That's my recommendation.
I would agree. Don't put the catch-all in, no.
Mr. Griffith?
I have to agree with everybody else, yes.
All right, there's a majority on no consensus on that. Mr. Betts, did you want to make an argument on that at all?
You know, I can see the need to get something in there, but I can also see, you know, we got to defer to staff on this one with the risk that's involved in not getting it exactly correct.
All right, Ms. Deming, can you kind of put all this together so far for us?
So yes, so we have the two resolutions and ordinances listed with the following changes. Changing the zoning and land use map on Palm from Buena Vista to Hacienda from CG Commercial General to Mixed Use Corridor, MUC. We have changing on the land use map and zoning map 3 parcels identified under parcel number 661-240-046, 661-240-047, and 661-240-001. Change on the map from public facilities to residential low, from P to RL. Add the additional energy overlay language specifically shown in this meeting as written in a written comment, but only as for the section related to the energy overlay designation within the general plan. Changed the RRD development standards in our zoning ordinance from a 5-acre minimum to a 1-acre minimum, and update page LLU 11 of the general plan from where it says currently 3 persons per acre to 3 persons per 5 acre. And those are the edits that we are proposing at this time.
Gerald, do I need to take these in different, or can we take all 3, the resolutions and the ordinance all together?
I didn't hear anything on open space recreational where it shows public institutional.
Are you referring to the Rancho de Oro parcel?
Anywhere that we have that situation occurring, yes.
Ms. Deming?
I don't have specific parcels that are being requested to change from public facility to open space, but it's definitely something we can look to do on a follow cleanup general plan if necessary, or we can leave it. I don't think it would affect it to leave it as a public facility on the general plan and update the zoning map with the open space, you know, as we find it when we clean up the zoning map.
Well, can I ask another question on that then? What's the difference between, why do we have 2 separate categories on here? One for park, one for public institutional.
So public institutional isn't just parks. It's our city hall, it's water district facilities, it's schools. It's usually where public institutions operate some sort of utility or building for the public. We have a separate open space section. One of the big reasons we try and separate open space is because that also affects like our calculations for how many acres a development, a subdivision might need to do when it relates to our open space and building parks and our impact fees. So there's, if we have parks that are developed, then we can identify them and we can update it in the future. We can also clean it up in the future, but there's no real impact in terms of how it's operated or what can and can't be built between the two designations that are, especially when it's a public park.
Okay, so if a utility wants to come in and take over a park, as long as it's public institutional, they can go do that. But if it's something that's contained in like our parks master plan, which I know the mayor worked really hard on for a lot of years to get that developed, which I think we have in our files, I'm wondering if a solution is that anywhere in that parks master plan, whether it's developed park or not, that it shows a designation of public institutional, that will be changed before second reading to designate it as what had been worked out with that park subcommittee task force that made sure, because we determined that we're woefully low on public park space. And I know the mayor, admirable work that he did on getting all of that put together. And I think we've got something there. I'm pretty sure that was a finished document, and that we could just rely on that just to go through the entire city and make sure that we don't have, my understanding is by your definition now, water district come in and say, well, it's a great piece of place for a collector or something or other, or whatever they do. Or a utility can come in and say, oh, this is a great place for us to put in a substation. And then we've lost a park. So I would really like to see that incorporated in it, if that's enough, that referencing the parks master plan to designate that would override anywhere that we show public institutional.
They'd still have to acquire it from us to be able to do.
I don't want it. Yeah, but the general plan says right now in the future, this is where we want parks and open space to be. And that's what we're doing here today, is setting this course for the city and what we're going to have, not to have to go and do future battles over park space. And I think since we do have a document that would easily identify it, it seems to be a good solution to me to make sure that a city that's woefully low on parks, that's studied the issue very well, can now deal with it. So I would really, really like to see that in there.
I think we can
Okay,
clean
so
that.
here's what I'm hearing.
We can get that cleaned up, and I think there's a consensus. Is there a consensus on that to make the map more clear on park space? I would support it.
Thank you.
And
Okay,
it looks
so-
like Mr. Griffith, so you do have a majority supporting it.
Okay, so here's what I have as that added recommendation. Change city-owned property identified as currently as a public institution that is in our park master plan to be changed to open space.
To change the open space recreational park. Or whatever designation, I don't know how detailed you got on that plan, Mr. Mayor.
I don't remember. I'm sure we can pull it up and figure it out. We did identify where the park should be, so.
Okay.
My concern right now is park, open space recreational park is what I'm specifically looking at.
All right, anything else from Mr. Betts?
No, if I got that one, I'm doing good.
All right. Any last comments from council? I'm going to try to let Ms. Deming try to do this one more time here, just so everybody's clear, as this is a very important document moving forward, and I don't want anybody to be come back and say they didn't understand that portion of it. So Ms. Deming, one last time on the additions to the staff recommendation.
So I have six additions. One is change the zoning and land use map on Palm from Buena Vista to Hacienda from commercial general to mixed use corridor. Change the 3 parcels that are identified as parcel number 661-240-046, 661-240-047, and 661-240-001 on the land use and zoning map from P to RL. update the energy overlay language in the general plan as recommended in the comment letter and as shown during the meeting, and specifically only the energy overlay section. Change the residential rural desert development standards from 5-acre minimums to 1-acre minimum. Change on page LU11 of the general plan, update the error from 3 to 3 persons per 5 acres in the population section. And on the general plan and zoning map, update all city-owned properties identified in the park master plan as a park, change it from currently from public facilities to the appropriate open space designation.
All right, so the way this is going to work is we have 2 resolutions in front of us. I believe we can take those resolutions at the same time, correct, Mr. Soriano? And then we'll take the ordinance last.
I think staff would recommend that council take them separately.
Okay.
You have a comment by Robert.
Sorry, no comments, Robert. I'm joking. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, Rebecca, that was actually from, the MUC was actually from Buena Vista down to Two Bunch, not the Hacienda.
To Two Bunch?
Yeah.
All right, with that clarification, is there anyone that would like to, in those amended recommendations, which part of the which resolution is in both resolutions?
Sorry, hold on, let me pull it up.
Mr. Mayor, while we're doing that, the second one lists specific plans that may be within a proximity recusal situation where we may have to draw straws if we aren't taking those separately.
We're not taking them separately, and Ms. Marahi has already stated that because it's a city hall, we don't have to do that, correct?
Actually, because I'm sorry for the confusion. With respect to the general plan, we don't have to take it with the specific plan, though. If there is some kind of recusal situation, the record could reflect, because the Zoom meeting is a little bit difficult. For those who need to recuse in the specific plan, should do so. General plan is a little bit different. It affects the entire city as a whole.
Okay, so the first one, the first resolution, does anybody need to recuse themselves? That's the general plan amendment, correct?
Correct.
And all the recommendations that you made, Ms. Deming, fall under that resolution?
So all recommendations except the change that is only to the zoning ordinance, which is change the RRD development standards from 5-acre to 1-acre needs to be captured in that amendment for that first resolution.
All right, does someone want to make a motion on that first resolution?
I move the resolution with the amendments provided by Ms. Deming.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Gardner, a second by Mr. Betts. Is there any more discussion? Please raise your hand if there is. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Betts?
Yes.
Councilmember Gardner?
Aye.
Councilmember Pye?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Griffith?
Aye.
And Mayor Mattis?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Our second resolution has multiple specific plans in them. Desert Highlands, Eagle Point, Indian Hills, Mountain View Estates, Arroyo Vista, Vortex Plan, Indigo Lake, and Vista del Monte. I do have a conflict on 1, possibly 2. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor, I have a conflict on Vortex specific plan and Arroyo Vista Rancho Del Oro.
Anyone else have a conflict on those? Do you want us to recuse ourselves, Ms. Marahi, on those? And have that resolution done with the 3 that do not have any conflicts?
That's absolutely fine.
All right, Mr. Griffith, it's your meeting. Mr. Betts and I will be turning our video off.
Jennifer, one quick question. Is that the same 500 feet circle that we usually have to deal with, or is it less or more restrictive?
That's I believe they're talking about the 500 foot circle. But if they're within that specific plan, it could affect their properties more so than others. So that is why there's the recusal.
But if we're not within that specific plan, and we still draw the 500-foot circle around, and that touches one of those?
Yes, that would also apply if that situation exists for you. That would apply to you.
Looking at the map, the closest one would possibly be the Eagle Point one. I can't honestly tell, but I don't believe it would.
Mr. Gardner, are you going to participate or not, or do you want to recuse?
I'll go ahead since there'll be three of us. If it is, it's within inches. So I don't believe it is, but since we don't have the map with the little circles on it, I'm going to go ahead.
Then I'm going to give the meeting back over to Mr. Griffith.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So do I have a motion to approve? It's a resolution of City Council in the City of Desert Hot Springs, California, repealing specific plans, which in light of the new general plan amendment GPA 201 and zoning amendment ZA 201 are outdated. Desert Highlands specific plan, Eagle Point specific plan, Indian Hills specific plan, Mountain View Estates 2 specific plan, Arroyo Vista, Rancho del Oro specific plan, Vortex specific plan, Indigo Lake specific plan, and Vista Del Monte specific plan.
So move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Gerald, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gardner?
Aye.
Councilmember Pai?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Griffith?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
All right, we get Mr. Betts back on the camera there. And then we'll introduce the first reading and read by title only. Mr. Soriano?
Yes, we would need a motion, mover and a seconder on the ordinance.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was before the ordinance. So right now we'll go ahead and we'll take the ordinance. Do I have any, do I have a motion?
I move the ordinance as presented by staff.
Do I have a
That
second?
includes, I assume that includes the amendments that would affect the zoning map as we previously
Yes,
went through.
including the amendments drafted by Ms. Denver.
Do I have a second?
Is this usually, is this?
Hold on a second, Russ. Let me get the second first. Do I have a second? All right, I have a motion by Mr. Gardner, a second by Mr. Griffith. Mr. Betts?
Is this reflecting the energy zone, or we've taken care of that in the previous vote?
So this motion would include all of the recommendations except the energy overlay language, because that's specific to the general plan only, and the update of the 3 persons per 5 acre, because that is also specific to the text of the general plan only. All the other remaining 4 items are related to the zoning map and would need to be in this motion as well.
I didn't understand that. I'm sorry. The question was, how does this relate to the energy? This item that we're on now, item 3, how does it relate to the energy zoning?
So we have, this does not relate to any of the amendment that we talked about. It relates to the energy zoning in that the ordinance updating the zoning code includes an update to our zoning ordinance for the industrial zones, including the IE industrial energy zone, but does not have any of the changes that were discussed that were specifically part of the general plan.
So we've already enacted those through the general plan vote then?
That is correct.
Okay, that's my question. I'm trying to get clear on what this is doing here. I need an explanation of what we got going on here with item 3.
Any other questions? Mr. Betts, any other questions?
I just want to know what's going on with item 3. Can we get a detail on this again, please?
Why, I'm sorry, you're going to have to be more specific on what you're asking. The ordinance is listed right there, and we've already gone through it multiple times. What are you specifically asking?
So this update updates all of the zoning districts that are shown and the zoning map. That's what this ordinance does.
Okay, but not the specific plans on the prior item.
Only in the sense that the zoning map that you're adopting does not show them as specific plans because the prior item removed them as current specific plans. So
okay, so then going to the city attorney.
But not directly because you're just updating the zoning map as a whole, not the specific plans.
So I see the city attorney shaking her head saying that this is a citywide exception.
You are fine to vote on this. It's complete citywide exception. You already recused yourself from the specific plan ones due to, you know, your real estate issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? All right, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Betts,
Yes.
Councilmember Gardner,
Aye.
Councilmember Pai,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Griffith,
Aye.
and Mayor Mattis.
Aye.
So motion passes unanimously. This is the introduction, first reading of an ordinance of the City Council amending or adding following chapters of the Desert Hot Springs Municipal Code, 17.04.050 definitions, 17.08 residential districts, 17.12 commercial districts, 17.14 mixed use districts, 17.16 industrial districts, 17.64 administration, 17.74 administrative conditional use permits, and amending the zoning map in accordance with zoning amendment ZA-20-1. The ordinance will return on June 2nd for a second reading and adoption.
I don't want to call Mr. Griffith's cat.
I want to say thank you to everybody for participating. I know it's been a long meeting, longer than our usual meetings. I mean, Mr. Betts and I have been in longer meetings than this before in the past. But I want to again thank the staff. This has been a long process. This has been something that's been needed for our community for so long. I remember, Chuck, you've been with the city, what, 6 months now? I'm sorry, 3 years now. 4 years now? Are we going on 4 years? And I think when you first stepped in, I said, let's get the general plan done. And this is the process. We've had multiple city managers and council start this and just not get through it. So this is definitely a good start to our getting down COVID stuff and getting back on track and getting this set so that we can develop our city the proper way. Again, Ms. Deming, MIG, to all your staff, thank you for all your hard work. I know we have one more reading on this, and let's hope we can get just streamline right through that and be set and to move forward on this and go from there. So again, thank you to everybody. We have a regular council meeting next week, I believe, or is it 2 weeks? I'm trying to look at a calendar here.
Yes, next week on Tuesday.
So any final comments?
We'll be introducing the budget for the following year.
All right, so it sounds like we got some busy meetings coming up. We still will be via Zoom for right now until most of the stuff is lifted and the council discusses it. But be safe out there. We're all in this together, and this special meeting is adjourned.